Beneath the soil of deserts, beneath the forests and oceans, lie the bones of an older Earth. The world we know is only the surface layer of something far deeper, a civilization erased not by conquest but by water. The Great Flood is not only a myth, it is the dividing line between two histories. Before it, there was memory. After it, there was amnesia. The story of humanity did not begin 6,000 years before the Common Era with the cities of Sumer or the pyramids of Egypt. It began long before, when the last ice age was ending and the sea was still rising to claim the coasts of the world. In those distant centuries, the planet was colder, the horizon wider, and the air alive with the hum of glaciers. Vast regions now drowned were then dry and green. The land bridge of Beringia connected Asia to the Americas. Doggerland stretched across what is now the North Sea. Sunderland joined the islands of Indonesia into a single fertile plain. It was along these coasts that the first great builders may have lived, measuring the sky and carving their knowledge into stone. They were not primitive wanderers but engineers of memory, working with precision that still astonishes modern eyes. Then came the cataclysm. Around 12,800 years before the present, the planet shifted. Ice melted in torrents, and seas rose 120 meters higher than before. Continents changed shape, rivers flooded valleys, and the great coastal settlements vanished beneath the tide. The survivors fled inland, carrying fragments of their world, geometry, astronomy, myth. They rebuilt in the centuries that followed, remembering through stone what water had erased. The monuments they raised became the foundations of every civilization to come. We are the heirs of that forgotten world. Our oldest temples, Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids of Egypt, the terraces of Peru, the ruins of Malta and Japan, all whisper the same story. Their stones are aligned to the stars, their dimensions mirror the rhythms of earth and sky, and their builders share a silent language that defies time. The more we uncover, the older our story becomes. The flood did not destroy civilization, it reset it. This book is a journey backward through that lost epoch, guided by evidence and myth alike. It follows the trail of the megaliths, from Turkey to the Pacific, from the deserts of Egypt to the jungles of South America, and asks a single question: who built these monuments, and how much did they know? The answer may rewrite the origin of civilization itself. What follows is not speculation but investigation, not fantasy but possibility. Each chapter examines the meeting point between archaeology and memory, between what we can measure and what humanity still remembers. The myths of Atlantis, of Tepe, of Manu and the Flood are not random inventions. They are echoes of a real event, the end of the Ice Age, when the seas rose and erased a chapter of history that we are only now beginning to recover. The stones remember what the sea forgot. They wait in silence, half buried, half drowned, whispering to anyone willing to listen. This is their story, the story of the first architects of time, the survivors of the flood, the forgotten engineers of Earth. Their monuments still stand, their message still endures, and it begins, as all stories do, with memory rising from beneath the waves. Beneath the ruins of our modern cities, time waits with quiet patience. The concrete towers that once touched the clouds crumble slowly into dust, the steel bones of bridges rusting into the rivers they once crossed. If thousands of years from now another species were to uncover the remains of our civilization, what would they think? Would they see the echoes of greatness, or only the silence of a vanished age? Every ruin, whether ancient or modern, is a mirror held up to time itself. And when we look into that mirror, we are forced to ask an uncomfortable question. How many worlds came before ours? Human history, as taught in textbooks, begins with familiar names: Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China. Their stories start around 6,000 years before the present, and their cities rise from the dust of rivers. Yet scattered across the world are monuments that refuse to fit this timeline. Giant stones cut and placed with precision, Megaliths standing in circles, pyramids aligned to stars that no longer occupy the same place in the sky. These structures whisper of hands that worked before recorded history, of minds that understood geometry and engineering when humanity was supposedly still chasing herds across the plains. To understand this paradox, we must first step beyond the boundaries of accepted archaeology and into the murky waters of prehistory. The evidence of civilization as we know it appears suddenly, fully formed, like a memory returning after a long sleep. But what if it was not the birth of civilization, only its rebirth? What if an older world had already risen, flourished and fallen long before the first city of Uruk or the first pyramid of Giza? This idea is not new. It is as old as the myths that humanity carries, like echoes from its forgotten childhood. The Greeks told of Atlantis, a shining island that fell beneath the sea. The Egyptians spoke of Tepe the first time, when the gods walked the earth and built in stone. The Sumerians listed antediluvian kings who ruled for thousands of years before a great flood wiped the slate clean. Across continents, cultures that never met share a single story. There was a world before the water came. The notion of a pre-flood world has long been dismissed as metaphor, a poetic way to explain the cycle of creation and destruction. Yet the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, brought a real and measurable cataclysm. Sea levels rose by more than 100 meters, ice sheets collapsed, and temperatures shifted within a human lifetime. To those who lived through it, it would have seemed as if the world itself was ending. Rivers turned violent, coastlines vanished, and whole regions were drowned forever. The memory of that chaos would have been carved into human consciousness, later retold as myth, and finally buried beneath the sands of time. When we consider the possibility of civilizations before the flood, we must also consider the nature of evidence. Stone endures, but everything else decays. Wood, fabric, and even metal are swallowed by the earth within millennia. The further we look back, the fewer traces remain. If a society had existed 12,000 or even 15,000 years ago, only their most durable works would survive. Their monuments of stone, carved with symbols we no longer understand. And indeed, such stones do exist. They stand scattered from Anatolia to the Andes, defying chronology and expectation. Our modern perspective often assumes progress to be a straight line, but history is not so obedient. It moves in waves, rising and collapsing, with each age forgetting the lessons of the last. The Great Flood that marked the end of the Ice Age was not merely a geological event, it was a reset button pressed by nature itself. Whatever cultures flourished along the coastlines of the Ice Age world would have been erased almost overnight, their knowledge scattered among survivors forced to start again. What we call the dawn of civilization may simply be the dawn after the storm. And so, we return to the central mystery. If a civilization truly existed before the flood, where are its ruins? Where are its cities, its roads, its evidence of daily life? The answer may lie beneath the seas, where ancient shorelines now rest under more than 100 meters of water. But some remnants escape the tide, hidden in plains and plateaus that once bordered the great Ice Age rivers. Among them stands a site that has forced archaeologists to rewrite their timelines and confront the depth of humanity's forgotten past. It is a place older than any known temple, constructed with precision when agriculture itself was still unborn. Its name is Göbekli Tepe, and it may be the first true doorway back into the world before history. The story of Göbekli Tepe begins in the dry hills of southeastern Turkey, where the air carries the scent of dust and time. From a distance, the mound seems unremarkable, just another rise in a landscape shaped by time and wind. Yet beneath this mound lies a secret that has shaken the foundations of archaeology. When excavations began in the 1990s, what emerged was a series of immense circular enclosures, each built from towering T-shaped pillars of limestone. Some stand more than 5 meters tall and weigh over 20 tons. They are carved with animals, lions, snakes, vultures, foxes, and with abstract symbols whose meanings are lost to us. Radiocarbon dating places the earliest construction of Göbekli Tepe around 9,600, years before the Common Era, at the very edge of the last ice age. This means it predates Stonehenge by 7,000 years, and the Egyptian pyramids by more than twice that span. Even more astonishing, the builders of this temple complex were not farmers or city dwellers but hunter-gatherers. According to conventional wisdom, societies at that stage should not have possessed the organization, surplus resources, or technical skill required to erect monuments of this scale, yet the stones speak for themselves. Archaeologists found that each pillar was quarried from bedrock using simple stone tools. The cuts are clean and deliberate, the symmetry striking. Some enclosures align roughly with celestial patterns, the rising of certain stars or the movements of the sun during solstices. This has led some researchers to suggest that Göbekli Tepe served as an astronomical observatory, a calendar in stone marking the rhythms of the heavens. Others believe it was a ceremonial center, where early humans gathered to share myths, hunt rituals, and perhaps memories of a world that had recently been lost to floods and fire. The end of the Ice Age was no gentle thaw. Geological evidence shows that between 12,900 and 11,700 years ago, the planet experienced wild fluctuations in temperature known as the Younger Dryas. It was a period of chaos, a sudden return to glacial cold followed by a rapid warming that melted vast ice sheets. In that turmoil, massive floods swept across continents. Some scientists argue that the event was triggered by a comet impact or a series of atmospheric explosions that destabilized climate patterns worldwide. Whatever the cause, the effect was catastrophic. Entire ecosystems shifted, coastlines drowned, and countless species vanished. It is within this context that Göbekli Tepe appears like a beacon. While glaciers were retreating and the world was reshaping itself, humans here were already carving symbols of permanence into stone. The act itself seems almost defiant, as if to say, "We will not be erased again." The builders may have witnessed the chaos firsthand, the rising waters, the burning skies, and chosen to encode their experience in stone. The animals carved on the pillars could represent constellations, spiritual totems, or both. Their art is not crude but sophisticated, implying an inherited tradition of symbolic thought that predates agriculture. Then comes the greatest mystery of all. Around 8,000 years before the Common Era, the entire site was deliberately buried under layers of earth and debris. It was not destroyed by invasion or erosion. It was entombed carefully, as though its builders wanted to preserve it for a future they would never see. This act of intentional burial protected the carvings from the ravages of time and flood, allowing them to survive almost perfectly intact for 12 millennia. The question is why? What knowledge did they fear would be lost, or what power did they believe was too dangerous to remain exposed? Some scholars see Göbekli Tepe as a spark that ignited civilization itself. They argue that the coordination required to build it would have demanded stable food supplies and cooperation among hundreds of people, pushing its creators toward agriculture and settlement. In this view, the temple came first, and farming followed, not the other way around. Others suggest that Göbekli Tepe is the last echo of an earlier age, built by survivors who already possessed architectural knowledge passed down from before the flood. Either way, it stands as a bridge between worlds, the Ice Age past and the dawn of history. When one walks among its excavated stones today, the feeling is not of entering something primitive, but something anciently advanced. The symmetry of the pillars, the mathematical precision in their placement, and the symbolic consistency across multiple enclosures suggest planning, not improvisation. And yet there are no signs of domestic life nearby. No houses, no fields, no hearths. It was not a village. It was a statement carved into the earth itself, perhaps a monument to memory or to loss. If Göbekli Tepe was the last temple of an older world, then the flood that followed was its requiem. As the ice sheets melted and sea levels rose, humanity scattered. Coastal settlements were drowned beneath the waves, their knowledge fragmented into myths carried by survivors. In the centuries that followed, stories of a golden age before the flood took shape, eventually becoming the myths of the antediluvian world. And while Göbekli Tepe remained buried and forgotten, other remnants may have sunk beyond reach. To find them, we must look not to deserts or mountains, but beneath the oceans, where the shorelines of the Ice Age now sleep. The map of that ancient Earth was vastly different. Vast plains connected what are now islands, and continents stretched farther into the sea. Doggerland once linked Britain to Europe. Sunderland spanned the now submerged lands of Indonesia. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia and North America. All of these places vanished beneath the waves when the Ice Age ended. If humans had built along those coasts, their cities now rest under 100 meters of water. The next step in our search for the pre-flood world is to follow the drowned shorelines, to trace the path of rising seas that erased an entire chapter of humanity's story. Only then can we begin to understand how much was truly lost, and how much still lies waiting beneath the waves. As the Ice Age ended, the transformation of the planet was relentless. The frozen sheets that once blanketed the northern continents melted into torrents that roared across the land. Oceans swallowed coastal plains, rivers shifted their courses, and climates rearranged themselves with dizzying speed. To the scattered human tribes who watched their world change, the floods must have seemed divine in scale, a punishment, or a cleansing. The memory of that deluge would echo through thousands of years, carried in the songs and scriptures of every later culture. It was the great forgetting. Not only cities and coastlines vanished, but stories, languages, and entire sciences disappeared beneath the rising seas. Today, more than 2/3 of the world's major cities lie on coastlines. During the Ice Age, those coastlines were far lower. What is now ocean floor once stretched as habitable land, rich in rivers, lakes, and fertile soil. Archaeologists estimate that nearly 10 million square kilometers of human-friendly terrain were drowned when sea levels rose by about 120 meters. That is an area larger than modern Europe. It is no wonder that so few traces of Ice Age civilization remain. The evidence lies under layers of silt and salt water, unreachable to ordinary excavation. The ruins we do see, like Göbekli Tepe, are the rare survivors that stood just high enough to escape the sea's advance. The pattern is hauntingly clear. As the world warmed, the centers of early life shifted inland and upward. The survivors of the floods became the wanderers of prehistory, carrying with them fragments of memory, how to shape stone, how to chart the heavens, how to honor the dead. These fragments reappeared later, thousands of years afterward, in the sudden rise of agriculture, architecture, and organized religion. When the first farmers of Mesopotamia planted seeds along the Tigris and Euphrates, they were unknowingly rebuilding what had been lost. When the first Egyptian priests aligned temples with the sunrise, they were repeating gestures far older than their own myths. The persistence of these patterns across continents is not coincidence, it is inheritance. We call it the human story, but it might better be called the human echo. Everywhere we look, we find traces of something that once connected us across vast distances, shared motifs, shared architecture, shared memories of a deluge that ended one world and began another. Perhaps this is why so many ancient cultures viewed time not as a line but as a cycle, turning endlessly through destruction and renewal. For them, the flood was not only history, it was prophecy. Modern science, cautious by necessity, often dismisses such parallels as coincidence, yet the deeper we dig, the more those coincidences begin to form patterns. Radiocarbon dates once thought impossible are now verified. Artifacts once labelled anomalies are slowly re-examined. Satellite imaging has revealed the ghost outlines of structures beneath deserts and seas. As our technology improves, the forgotten world becomes less mythical and more tangible. The line between legend and archaeology begins to blur. Still, it is important to tread carefully. Myth alone cannot serve as proof, and imagination is a poor substitute for data. The goal is not to turn legend into fact, but to recognize where the two might overlap. Every civilization, no matter how advanced, leaves traces of its existence in geology. Floods leave sediment, fires leave ash, quarries leave scars. The world remembers, even when we forget. And when we read those memories correctly, a picture emerges, not of a single lost empire ruling the planet, but of many centers of ingenuity that flourished and fell before history began recording names. Göbekli Tepe is one of those centers, but it cannot stand alone. There must have been predecessors and contemporaries, other sites, other builders, scattered across the Ice Age world. Some may lie beneath the Mediterranean, others beneath the Indian Ocean, still others under the Atlantic's murky floor. The next frontier of archaeology will not be deserts or jungles, but the continental shelves now submerged beneath the sea. Sonar and submersible expeditions have already found intriguing formations off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Caribbean, places where legend and geology intersect in unsettling ways. The story of the pre-flood world is therefore not fantasy. It is an open question waiting for evidence to catch up with memory. The flood that ended the Ice Age was real, its scale immense, its effects global. The only uncertainty lies in how much humanity had achieved before those waters rose. If people 12,000 years ago could carve 20-ton pillars and align them with the stars, what else might they have built along the vanished coasts of their world? How many chapters of our own story are still hidden beneath the waves? When we stand before the ancient stones of Göbekli Tepe, or the weathered blocks of Malta, or the silent terraces of Peru, we are looking through a window cracked by time. We see only fragments, yet those fragments are enough to remind us that civilization did not begin in a single place or moment. It was a flame that had burned before, extinguished by the flood, and kindled again by the survivors. Humanity's genius was not invented after the Ice Age, it was rediscovered. As the first chapter of this investigation closes, one truth stands clear. The world before history was not empty. It was alive with builders, thinkers, and dreamers whose legacy still shapes our imagination. The megaliths that endure on hilltops and under seas are their signatures, messages carved for the future saying, "We were here and we remembered the stars." And so our journey continues, following those stones back into the mists of time. The first great clue, Göbekli Tepe, stands not only as an archaeological wonder, but as a question carved into bedrock. Who built it, and what world did they come from? To find the answer, we must travel deeper into the age when the ice retreated, when the skies changed, and when humanity stood at the threshold between memory and myth. The dawn light spills over the limestone hills of southeastern Turkey, turning the landscape into waves of gold and shadow. The air is cool, sharp, filled with the scent of ancient dust. Beneath this sun-baked soil lies one of the most extraordinary discoveries in all of archaeology, a temple older than any known city, a sanctuary raised not by farmers or kings but by hunters. Its name is Göbekli Tepe, and it stands at the very edge of humanity's remembered past. The name means Potbelly Hill, but the truth buried inside that mound is far greater than the gentle sound of its Turkish words. When Klaus Schmidt, a German archaeologist from the German Archaeological Institute, first arrived here in the 1990s, he noticed strange stones protruding from the earth, massive rectangular pillars arranged in circles. The local farmers had long thought them tombstones, remnants of some medieval graveyard. But as Schmidt began to excavate, the hill opened like a wound in time. What emerged was not a cemetery, but a cathedral carved from prehistory itself. Each pillar is shaped like a T, some more than 5 meters tall, others weighing as much as 20 tons. They were quarried from the limestone bedrock nearby, dragged and erected with astonishing precision. Many bear carvings, reliefs of animals so vivid they seem to move when the light shifts across their surfaces. There are foxes, boars, scorpions, vultures, snakes, and abstract shapes that might represent stars or constellations. The artistry is not crude or primitive. It is confident, deliberate, symbolic. These were not random decorations. They were messages in stone, written by a people who wanted to speak to the future. Radiocarbon dating places the earliest levels of Göbekli Tepe at around 9,600 years before the Common Era. That is roughly 12,000 years ago, when the last ice age had only just ended and the world was emerging from the younger Dryas, a sudden, violent return to glacial cold followed by an equally abrupt warming. Humanity at that time was supposed to be living in small nomadic groups, surviving by hunting and gathering without agriculture, metal or writing. Yet here, on this barren hill, they built one of the most complex ritual structures ever known. It is difficult to comprehend the implications. The construction of Göbekli Tepe required quarrying, carving, transporting, and arranging hundreds of massive stones. It demanded geometry, coordination, and planning over years. It required laborers, artisans, and organizers, people who could conceive and execute a design that would have taken generations. Such a feat implies social hierarchy, leadership, and shared belief. In other words, civilization in everything but name, and yet there are no signs of permanent dwellings near the site. No houses, no refuse, no evidence of everyday life. This was not a city, it was a place of gathering, perhaps for ceremonies that united scattered tribes under a shared cosmology. Some archaeologists believe it may have functioned as a kind of sanctuary, a neutral ground where different groups met to honor their ancestors or the forces of nature they worshipped. Others suspect it was an observatory, aligned to the movements of stars and the precession of the equinoxes. If true, that would mean its builders understood celestial cycles thousands of years before recorded astronomy. The enclosures at Göbekli Tepe are circular, with two central pillars standing taller than the rest. These twin stones face each other like silent guardians. On their surfaces are carvings of arms and hands, suggesting that the T-shapes themselves might represent stylized human figures, perhaps deities, ancestors, or priest-kings of the forgotten world. The pillars surrounding them are smaller, almost like worshippers encircling their divine counterparts. The layout feels intentional, symbolic, and deeply spiritual. When viewed from above, the complex resembles a map of constellations frozen in limestone. Some researchers propose that the arrangement mirrors the night sky as it appeared around 10,000 years before the Common Era, when the constellation of Orion rose differently along the horizon. Others have pointed out alignments with Sirius, the brightest star visible from this latitude, whose rising marked seasonal transitions. Whether or not these alignments were deliberate, the builders of Göbekli Tepe clearly possessed an awareness of the heavens rare for their time. But perhaps the most puzzling aspect of Göbekli Tepe is its deliberate burial. Around 8,000 years before the Common Era, the people who built it filled the enclosures with debris and covered them completely. This was not random sedimentation or the result of collapse. It was purposeful. They sealed their creation as though performing a ritual of closure. Why? Perhaps it was an act of reverence, protecting the sacred site for the spirits of their ancestors. Perhaps it was an attempt to preserve knowledge for future generations, knowing that catastrophe might strike again. Or perhaps it marked the end of an age, the moment when their world finally surrendered to the floods and changes sweeping across the planet. For nearly 10 millennia, the buried stones slept beneath the earth. The rains came and went. Empires rose and fell. The Sumerians built their ziggurats. The Egyptians raised their pyramids. The Greeks their temples. And all the while, the oldest temple of all lay hidden, forgotten, until the late 20th century uncovered its secret. It is as if the earth itself had been waiting for humanity to be ready to remember. Today, as archaeologists continue to unearth new layers of Göbekli Tepe, we find evidence of even older structures beneath the known ones. What we have seen so far may only be the surface of a complex that extends far deeper, both physically and chronologically. The lowest levels remain unexplored, sealed by the same earth that once hid the upper circles. If those lower chambers are excavated, they could push the origins of organized construction even further back, perhaps to before 10,500 years before the Common Era, aligning eerily with the date Plato gave for the fall of Atlantis. Göbekli Tepe is more than an archaeological site. It is a threshold, a gateway through which the mythic past begins to touch the scientific present. It stands as proof that the human story is far older and more complex than the narrow slice we call history. It tells us that long before the first written words, long before the first city walls, there were minds capable of envisioning eternity and carving it into stone. The world that surrounded Göbekli Tepe was one of transition. The Ice Age had ended, yet its ghosts lingered in the air and soil. The great glaciers that once covered Europe and North America were retreating, releasing rivers that tore through the land with violent force. Seas rose, swallowing ancient coastlines. In this turbulent age, small human bands roamed the newly thawed plains of the Fertile Crescent. They hunted gazelle and aurochs, gathered wild grains, and sheltered in caves from the unpredictable storms that swept across the sky. Amid this shifting landscape, the builders of Göbekli Tepe did something no one expected of hunter-gatherers. They built forever. The stones they shaped were not mere markers. They were instruments of memory, designed to outlast flesh and fire. Each pillar was quarried from limestone, cut using primitive flint tools, then hauled uphill through sheer human will. The builders had no wheels, no beasts of burden, no metal chisels. Yet the surfaces of these stones are smooth and deliberate, the edges precise. This was not random stacking of rock. It was engineering guided by an understanding of balance, geometry, and design. Each T-shaped monolith was placed within a carefully measured circle, suggesting a central plan drawn in the mind long before the first stone was moved. At the heart of every enclosure stood two towering pillars, the so-called central twins. Their human-like forms, with arms and hands carved along their sides, suggest that the builders viewed them as anthropomorphic, perhaps representations of ancestors, gods, or cosmic beings. Around these central figures stood smaller pillars arranged in a ring, like attendants around a throne. The repetition of this design across multiple enclosures hints at a unified vision. These were not isolated shrines, they were part of a greater cosmology. To understand the mindset of the builders, one must imagine living in a world where the heavens dictated survival. The cycles of stars, the movements of the sun and moon, and the migration of animals all determined when to hunt, when to gather, when to move. Over generations, such patterns became sacred. The builders of Göbekli Tepe may have encoded these celestial rhythms into their architecture. Several alignments suggest that certain enclosures face points on the horizon where bright stars once rose, stars that today no longer appear in those positions because of Earth's slow axial precession. This means the builders observed the sky with long-term precision, tracking movements that unfolded over centuries. Among these alignments, the rising of Sirius, the dog star, holds special interest. Around 9,500 years before the Common Era, Sirius first became visible from this latitude after thousands of years below the horizon. Its sudden reappearance would have been an awe-inspiring event, a new star emerging from darkness, a symbol of rebirth after cataclysm. Some researchers believe the builders of Göbekli Tepe mark this event in their stone rings, turning the temple into a calendar of cosmic resurrection. If true, then the people who carved these stones were astronomers of a sophistication far beyond their supposed era. But Göbekli Tepe was not only a place of observation, it was a place of transformation. Its very construction required cooperation on a scale never before seen. To quarry, transport, and erect stones of such size, hundreds of people had to work together with coordination and shared belief. This collaboration would have forged bonds among scattered tribes, uniting them under a common vision. Many archaeologists now suspect that the building of Göbekli Tepe sparked the very birth of agriculture. The need to feed laborers for long periods may have encouraged the cultivation of wild grains, leading eventually to domesticated crops. If so, then civilization itself began not in a field but in a temple. Still, the site's deliberate burial remains one of archaeology's deepest enigmas. Around 8,000 years before the Common Era, the enclosures were systematically filled with debris, broken tools, animal bones, and rubble, and sealed beneath layers of soil. It was not destruction but preservation. This careful covering ensured the carvings would remain protected for millennia. Why would a people go to such effort to conceal their greatest achievement? Some believe it marked the end of a sacred age, when the gods withdrew from the earth. Others see it as an act of remembrance, a way to preserve a legacy after disaster. If a cataclysm like the Younger Dryas floods had erased much of their world, then Göbekli Tepe may have been entombed as a message to the survivors of the next age. Geological studies show that during the time of Göbekli Tepe's construction, the region experienced dramatic climatic shifts. The Younger Dryas had ended, temperatures rose sharply, and rainfall patterns changed. The once green plains of Anatolia began to dry, transforming into the semi-arid steppe seen today. For communities dependent on hunting, this would have been devastating. The game herds dwindled, rivers shrank, and survival demanded adaptation. The builders may have interpreted these changes as divine judgment or cosmic upheaval. By burying their sacred site, they could have symbolically laid their world to rest, sealing the memory of their ancestors beneath the earth as they moved on to new ways of life. When modern archaeologists uncovered the site, they found no sign of battle or invasion, no traces of fire or ruin. The burial was too deliberate, too peaceful. It speaks of ritual, not collapse. The same earth that hid it for 10,000 years also protected it from erosion, preserving details as sharp as the day they were carved. The fox still prowls the pillar's edge, the vulture still spreads its wings, and the snake still coils across the stone. They are voices from 12,000 years ago, speaking across time in a language of images and geometry. What these symbols mean is still unknown. Some suggest the animals represent constellations, a prehistoric zodiac encoding the sky of their age. Others see them as totems of clans or mythic beings from a shared cosmology. The repetition of certain creatures across different enclosures hints at narrative continuity, perhaps a story told in stone of creation, destruction, and rebirth. Whatever their meaning, the carvings reveal a mind attuned to metaphor, to abstract thought, and to a universe filled with living forces. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe shattered the conventional model of human development. It showed that spirituality and art did not emerge as byproducts of agriculture. They may have been its cause. The temple came first, civilization second. In building for the gods, or for the cosmos, humans learned to build for themselves. The act of construction transformed the species, teaching cooperation, patience, and purpose. In that sense, Göbekli Tepe is not just a monument to the past, it is the birthplace of the future. As the excavations continue, each new discovery deepens the mystery. Beneath the known layers lie others still untouched, suggesting that what we see now is only the final phase of a tradition stretching back even further. If those older layers reveal structures of equal or greater sophistication, they could push organized human architecture into the Ice Age itself, an unthinkable revision of history. And if that happens, the myth of a pre-flood civilization may cease to be myth at all. The stones of Göbekli Tepe stand like frozen memories, their silence heavier than any language. They are the voices of a people who looked upon the heavens with understanding and fear, who saw the sky itself as alive. When night falls over the site today, modern lights fade and the Milky Way reclaims the sky. The same stars that shone 12,000 years ago still burn above the hill, though they no longer stand in the same places. Earth's slow precession has turned the heavens slightly, shifting constellations as centuries passed. Yet the builders of Göbekli Tepe once traced those patterns with such precision that their temple may encode an ancient map of the stars, drawn not with ink but with stone. To them, the heavens were not distant. They were a realm of spirits, ancestors, and cycles. The vulture carved into one of the pillars may represent death, carrying souls from the world of the living into the sky. The serpent could symbolize rebirth, renewal, or the path of the Milky Way itself. The fox might be the trickster or messenger between realms. Each image is layered with meaning, part of a language whose grammar we have lost. What we call mythology may once have been a scientific code, a way to preserve astronomical and ecological knowledge through symbol and story. The structure of Göbekli Tepe reveals another truth about its builders. They were masters of stability. The pillars are anchored deep into the ground, arranged in concentric circles that distribute weight evenly. No mortar binds them, yet they have survived 12 millennia of earthquakes and erosion. The design principles here echo later achievements found in Egyptian and Andean stonework, where interlocking blocks resist seismic movement. Could such knowledge have developed independently in different regions, or might it have originated from a shared ancestral source carried across generations after the flood? If we consider the timing, the parallels become unsettling. Around 9,600 years before the Common Era, as the ice melted and global sea levels surged, this temple was already standing. Its builders watched the transformation of the Earth itself. To them, the flood was not myth, it was memory. The same event that erased coastlines also erased continuity. As the ocean swallowed the old world, isolated survivors may have migrated inland, bringing fragments of knowledge with them. Göbekli Tepe could represent the refuge of one such group, determined to carve their story into the hills before it too was forgotten. There is a haunting symmetry between the deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe and the drowning of the Ice Age world. Both are acts of concealment, one by human hands, the other by nature's fury. The temple was hidden beneath earth, while entire landscapes were hidden beneath water. What connects them is the human impulse to remember even in the face of loss. When the builders covered their sacred circles, they may have known that another flood was inevitable, that time itself would become an ocean burying all things. They could not stop the tide, but they could leave behind a message. We were here and we understood. Modern archaeology often resists such interpretations, and rightly so. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. But Göbekli Tepe is not a claim. It is evidence carved in limestone. It demands that we question the neat sequence of human history that places cities, writing, and architecture within the last 6,000 years. If people 12,000 years ago could design and execute a site of such complexity, then civilization's roots stretch far deeper than our textbooks admit. The line between prehistory and history blurs until it vanishes, leaving only the stones as witnesses. Some scientists now suggest that the very idea of civilization may need redefining. If we measure it not by agriculture or writing, but by collective creativity, by the ability to organize and build according to vision, then Göbekli Tepe represents civilization in its purest form. Its builders left no palaces, no kings, no armies, only art, geometry, and faith. In that sense, it is more advanced than many empires that followed. It shows that humanity's first great act was not conquest, but construction, not domination, but devotion. The more we uncover, the more the site refuses to be isolated from the global story. Other megalithic traditions appear millennia later, yet carry echoes of the same ideas: circular architecture, astronomical alignment, and reverence for stone as eternal. Malta's temples, built around 4,000 years before the Common Era, mirror Göbekli Tepe's form on a smaller scale. The stone circles of Britain, though younger by thousands of years, repeat the same pattern of cosmic orientation. The pyramids of Egypt, the platform of Tiwanaku, and the terraces of Peru all share the same marriage of geometry and faith. It is as if humanity, scattered by the floods, remembered in fragments what had once been known in full. Göbekli Tepe therefore stands not only as a monument to the past, but as a seed of connection. It links myth to science, memory to matter, and the earth to the sky. Every carving, every alignment, every buried chamber whispers of a people who refused to let knowledge die. They built in stone because they understood that time devours all else. Theirs was a message to the future, a message we have only just begun to decode. As night falls once more over Potbelly Hill, the stars emerge like the eyes of forgotten gods. The wind moves softly across the stones, carrying dust from the same plains where humanity first began to dream. Somewhere beneath the soil lie still deeper layers, unopened, waiting. Each fragment unearthed brings us closer to the moment when the world changed, when ice turned to water and memory turned to myth. The next step in our search lies beyond the land itself. For if Göbekli Tepe survived the flood, others did not. They lie drowned beneath the oceans that swallowed the Ice Age world. There, along the ghostly coastlines of the past, we may find the missing chapters of human origin. The rising seas buried more than land, they buried memory. To follow that memory, we must now dive beneath the waves and trace the drowned continents that once held the first architects of Earth. The trail leads to places where legend and geology meet, where cities are said to lie beneath the sea, and where the forgotten world might yet be waiting to be found. When the last great sheets of ice began to melt, the earth groaned as if awakening from a long dream. Rivers swelled beyond their banks, mountains wept torrents, and coastlines dissolved into the advancing sea. For thousands of years, the oceans rose, not in quiet inches, but in surges that reshaped continents. The end of the Ice Age was not gentle, it was violent, sudden, and absolute. And in that deluge, an entire world vanished. The numbers tell the story, though they cannot capture its terror. Between 19,000 and 7,000 years before the Common Era, the global sea level rose by roughly 120 meters. Entire regions that once held life, forests and plains were swallowed. The shallow continental shelves where most early humans lived became seafloors. Islands became mountaintops. The memory of this transformation lingers in every flood myth humanity has ever told. Imagine standing on the shore of an Ice Age continent. The horizon stretches farther than it does today, for the sea lies far below the present line. The air is cooler, the light sharper. Herds of mammoth graze the tundra. Rivers wind through vast valleys now hidden beneath the waves. People move along those rivers, following fish migrations, gathering wild grains, hunting reindeer and bison. They build shelters of wood and bone near the coasts, where the sea provides abundance. And then, within a few generations, the sea begins to move. Slowly at first, then with frightening speed. The tides grow stronger, the storms grow larger. Each season, the water claims more land. For the people who lived then, there was no science to explain it, only awe and dread. The world they had known for countless generations was dying. In their eyes, it was as if the gods themselves had turned against them. They fled inland, carrying memories that would one day become myths. Tales of wrathful waters and suns that burned too hot. Some survived, some did not, but all remembered. Modern geology has reconstructed much of that lost geography. Where the North Sea now lies, a vast plain once connected Britain to mainland Europe. Archaeologists call it Doggerland. It stretched from the coasts of modern Denmark to what is now England, dotted with rivers, lakes and settlements. Fossilized bones, ancient tools, and even traces of human footprints have been found beneath the seabed, preserved in mud. Around 8,000 years before the Common Era, a massive landslide off Norway, the Storegga Slide, triggered tsunamis that swept across Doggerland, finishing what the melting ice had begun. Within years, the plain was gone, its people scattered to higher ground. Farther east, the same story unfolded on an even greater scale. The region we now call Indonesia was once part of a vast subcontinent known as Sundaland. It stretched from modern Malaysia through Java and Borneo to the Philippines, a single expanse of fertile land rich in rivers and forests. When the ice melted, the shallow seas of the Java and South China basins flooded it completely. Millions of square kilometers disappeared, fragmenting the land into the islands we see today. Genetic and linguistic studies suggest that many of the peoples of Southeast Asia and the Pacific trace their ancestry to those who fled the sinking of Sundaland. Their myths speak of a drowned homeland beneath the waves, a paradise lost to the sea. Across the planet, the same drama played out. The land bridge of Beringia, which once connected Siberia to Alaska, vanished beneath the Arctic waters. The Persian Gulf, once a lush inland valley fed by rivers from Mesopotamia and Iran, filled and became the Gulf we know today. In every region, the coastlines retreated, carrying with them the evidence of early human settlement. If any Ice Age civilizations had existed, their ruins now lie 100 meters beneath the waves. This is more than speculation. Modern sonar and underwater archaeology have begun to reveal ghostly shapes on the ocean floor, terraces, walls, and formations that do not appear entirely natural. Off the western coast of India, in the Gulf of Kambat, sonar surveys have mapped geometric patterns stretching for kilometers, consistent with ancient urban planning. Divers have recovered artifacts such as stone tools and pottery fragments, buried under layers of sediment dated to at least 9,000 years before the Common Era. If verified, these could represent one of the oldest submerged settlements on Earth. Elsewhere, in the waters near Okinawa and Yonaguni in Japan, divers have discovered colossal stone formations that resemble steps, terraces, and platforms. Their edges are unnaturally straight, their angles too perfect for mere erosion. The debate continues: natural geology or ancient architecture. But even if nature carved the shapes, humans may have modified them later, adapting the environment to ritual or settlement. Whatever their origin, their age coincides with the time when the seas were still rising, when islands were becoming memories. All of this suggests a haunting possibility: that much of humanity's earliest experimentation with architecture, agriculture, and navigation occurred not on the lands we now inhabit, but on coastlines, long submerged. When those coasts drowned, the evidence drowned with them. The first true cities may lie buried beneath silt and coral, awaiting rediscovery by the technology of a new age. The ancient flood myths of the world may thus be echoes of a single event: the end of the Ice Age, retold through the lens of trauma and survival. The story of Noah, of Utnapishtim in the Sumerian tablets, of Deucalion in Greek legend, and of Manu in the Indian scriptures, all describe the same memory: a time when the waters rose without mercy. The names differ, but the meaning is the same. A world perished, and a few survived to rebuild. These were not merely moral allegories. They were memories carved into collective consciousness, passed down for 10,000 years. For centuries, scholars dismissed these tales as symbolic, but the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, dated to the very threshold of the flood, changes everything. It provides a physical anchor for the myths. Here is a temple that stood at the end of the Ice Age, built by survivors who may have witnessed the chaos firsthand. If such a monument could survive, how many others were lost beneath the water? The Earth keeps its secrets well, but not forever. As technology advances, sonar mapping, satellite altimetry, and autonomous submersibles are beginning to peel back the ocean's veil. The drowned landscapes of the Ice Age are being rediscovered, one contour at a time. Beneath the waves lie the answers to questions we have barely learned to ask. The story of the flood is not one event, not one moment in time. It is the sound of the Earth changing its shape, the planet resetting its boundaries. It is the sound of memory sinking beneath the sea and waiting for someone to listen. When we speak of the flood, we often imagine a single catastrophe, a moment when the sky opened and the waters rose. But the truth is more complex and far more terrifying. The end of the Ice Age brought not one flood but many. Each pulse of melting ice sent torrents across the continents, drowning valleys and plains that had been home for thousands of years. The oceans rose in waves of destruction separated by centuries, giving humanity just enough time to rebuild before the next deluge came. The process took millennia, yet to those who lived it, it must have seemed as though the world was collapsing generation by generation. Consider Doggerland, the lost plain of northern Europe. During the Ice Age, it was a paradise of rivers and meadows connecting what we now call Britain to the European mainland. It was rich in game, fish, and fresh water, a land of birch and willow forests stretching from the Netherlands to Denmark. Archaeologists have recovered the bones of mammoths and elk from its seabed, along with flint tools shaped by human hands. For thousands of years, people hunted and thrived there, unaware that they lived in a land doomed by the sea. Then came the meltwater pulses, rapid surges of ocean rise caused by collapsing glaciers in North America. One of these, known as Meltwater Pulse 1b, struck around 11,000 years before the Common Era. The waters advanced across Doggerland year by year, river by river. The inhabitants retreated inland, building camps on higher ground. By the time of the Storegga Slide tsunami around 8,000 years before the Common Era, little remained above water. When the final wave came, it erased the last traces of that lost world. Today, sonar surveys reveal river channels and ancient shorelines beneath the North Sea, silent testimony to a drowned homeland. Half a world away, in what is now Southeast Asia, the same story unfolded on a scale so vast it reshaped entire civilizations. Sunderland, the great subcontinent that once stretched across the region, was one of the richest environments on Earth. Its plains were covered with forests and crossed by immense rivers. Archaeologists have found traces of early human occupation along the present coasts of Sumatra, Borneo, and the Malay Peninsula, suggesting that these islands were once connected parts of a single ecosystem. When the ice melted, the South China Sea flooded the valleys and lowlands, fragmenting Sunderland into the islands of Indonesia and the Philippines. Genetic studies support the idea that this flooding forced mass migrations. The Austronesian peoples who later spread across the Pacific may have originated from these ancient refugees. Their myths tell of lost islands, of a homeland swallowed by the sea. In the legends of Indonesia, one hears of the land of Nusa Tenggara, once vast and fertile, now beneath the waves. In the stories of Polynesia, the ancestors speak of Hawaii or Lemuria, islands that sank beneath rising tides. These are not isolated imaginations. They are shared memories of a real event experienced across continents. Far to the north, another land bridge was vanishing. Beringia, the vast stretch of tundra that connected Asia to North America, existed for tens of thousands of years as a highway for humans and animals. It was a cold but habitable corridor, dotted with grasslands and shallow lakes. The people who crossed it eventually populated the Americas, but as the glaciers melted, the sea advanced from both sides, cutting the bridge in two and swallowing it beneath the Arctic waters. By 10,000 years before the Common Era, the connection was gone forever. Even the Persian Gulf hides a secret history. Before it became a body of water, it was an immense river valley fed by four great rivers: the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Karun, and the Wadi Batin. Archaeologists call it the Gulf Oasis, a fertile plain that could have supported early human settlements long before the rise of Mesopotamia. Around 8,000 years before the Common Era, the sea filled the valley, transforming it into the Gulf we know today. Some scholars suggest that the memory of this inundation may have inspired later Sumerian flood legends, the same stories that would evolve into the tale of Utnapishtim and eventually Noah. In each of these cases, the pattern is unmistakable: sudden sea level rise, displacement of populations, and cultural memory preserved through myth. The flood was global, not in a literal sense of a single wave covering the planet, but in its impact on humanity. Every coastal people experienced their own version of it. Together, these overlapping experiences formed a collective trauma, a memory so deep it became universal. That is why flood myths appear in the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Oceania alike. It is not coincidence, it is remembrance. As the oceans claimed more land, the survivors were forced inland, often into harsher environments. The abundance of the coasts was gone. People had to adapt by domesticating plants and animals, learning to farm the valleys that remained. Civilization, as we understand it, may have arisen not because of comfort, but because of crisis. The flood did not destroy humanity. It forced humanity to evolve. In that sense, the drowned world was not an ending, but a transformation. It broke the continuity of the old world so that a new one could begin. But what was lost beneath the waves may have been extraordinary. If humans were already capable of building Göbekli Tepe 12,000 years ago, it is not unreasonable to imagine that coastal peoples with similar intelligence and resources built their own structures along the Ice Age shorelines. Those regions, now submerged, would have been ideal for early experimentation with stone architecture, navigation, and trade. When the seas rose, their achievements were erased, leaving us with only fragments on higher ground, temples without cities, ruins without context. Modern exploration has only begun to touch these forgotten realms. In the Indian Ocean, sonar scans reveal symmetrical terraces near the Gulf of Khumbat. In the Caribbean, divers report block-like formations off the coast of the Bahamas, known as the Bimini Road. Off Japan's Yonaguni Island, as we shall see, massive steps and platforms rise from the seabed like the remains of a lost citadel. Whether natural or human-made, these structures invite a single compelling question: how many of our ancestors' works lie just beyond our reach, beneath 100 meters of silence? The drowned world is not only geological, It is psychological. It represents humanity's first great trauma, the event that shattered our innocence. The people of the Ice Age watched the Earth itself turn against them, their homes vanishing day by day. They responded with art, with myth, and with the desperate hope that something might survive. The temples, stories, and alignments we study today are all echoes of that hope. They are the bridges between the world that was and the world that followed. As the oceans reached their modern levels around 6,000 years before the Common Era, the Earth finally stabilized. The Great Melting ended, the climate warmed, and the foundations of recorded history began to take shape. Yet beneath the waves, the old world still sleeps. Its plains and valleys lie undisturbed, sealed beneath layers of silt. The technology of our time may soon allow us to reach them, to open the final chapter of the human story, a chapter written not in ink, but in stone, coral, and sand. Our next step leads beneath the Pacific to one of the most controversial discoveries of the modern era, a monument of stone steps, terraces, and columns lying 25 meters below the surface of the sea near the island of Yonaguni. There, in the deep blue silence, we may find either the handiwork of nature or the last surviving architecture of the world before the flood. Beneath the blue waters of Japan's Ryukyu Islands, where coral gardens sway in the currents and the seafloor falls away into shadow, there lies a mystery carved in stone. Divers who descend along the southern coast of Yonaguni Island find themselves drifting above sharp terraces, towering columns, and steps that seem almost too perfect to be natural. At 25 meters below the surface, the shape of the structure emerges, a massive, tiered monument that looks like a forgotten temple or a sunken citadel. Its edges are clean, its walls rise in straight lines, and its presence feels deliberate. For years, this place has divided science and myth. Some see it as proof of an ancient civilization lost to the rising seas. Others insist it is merely the product of natural geological forces, a quirk of sandstone erosion shaped by currents and time. Between these two positions lies one of the greatest riddles of prehistory. If the Yonaguni monument is natural, it is a masterpiece of coincidence. If it is human-made, it rewrites the story of civilization. The discovery happened by chance in 1986. A local diver named Kihachiro Aratake was exploring the seabed when he noticed a strange shape rising from the depths. Flat platforms, symmetrical steps, and vertical walls unlike anything else in the region. The structure stretched more than 150 meters in length and stood over 20 meters high. It resembled a stepped pyramid, its surface scored by grooves and terraces forming sharp 90-degree angles. Arataki brought word to researchers, and soon the site became a magnet for geologists, archaeologists, and explorers from around the world. Among them was Professor Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyu, who spent decades studying the formation. After hundreds of dives and extensive sonar mapping, Kimura concluded that the monument showed clear signs of human modification. He identified what appeared to be stairways, roads, gates, and even stone carvings partially covered by coral. In his view, the site was once above sea level, perhaps part of a coastal city or ceremonial complex that was drowned around 10,000 years ago when sea levels rose after the last ice age. Kimura's claims were bold, but they were not without basis. The island of Yonaguni sits at the southwestern tip of Japan, near the edge of the East China Sea, where tectonic activity and ocean currents continually reshape the land. During the Ice Age, the sea level in this region was more than 100 meters lower than today, exposing a wide coastal shelf. If humans had lived there, as they did across much of East Asia, they would have occupied these fertile lowlands. When the ice melted and the seas advanced, their settlements would have been among the first to disappear. What Kimura found at Yonaguni seemed to fit that pattern perfectly. The terraces resemble those of a ziggurat or stepped pyramid. Long parallel ridges connect them, forming what looks like a grand stairway descending into the depths. Some sections bear resemblance to roads or processional ways, flanked by upright stones that could be pillars. At the base of the main structure lies a large flat area, which Kimura interpreted as a plaza. Nearby, smaller formations rise like outlying buildings. Even if only part of it was shaped by human hands, it would represent an astonishing feat of Ice Age engineering. Skeptics, however, argue that nature can produce such regular patterns through simple erosion. Yonaguni's sandstone bedrock fractures naturally along vertical and horizontal planes, creating right angles and terraces when exposed to currents and pressure. The island's coastal cliffs above the water show similar shapes, stepped layers and square edges formed entirely by geological processes. To many geologists, the monument is no more than an underwater mirror of those cliffs, sculpted by time and sea. Yet this explanation, while plausible, does not account for every detail. Certain surfaces of the Yonaguni structure are smooth beyond what currents could produce. Some grooves run perfectly straight for dozens of meters, intersecting at precise angles. There are flat platforms that appear intentionally leveled, their surfaces free of natural undulation. And on several stones, divers have reported markings resembling carvings, lines, faces, and animal-like forms partly encrusted with coral. These details suggest that humans may have enhanced or modified an already dramatic natural formation, transforming it into a place of ritual or gathering. If that is true, the implications are immense. To shape such a monument, humans would have needed tools, organization, and purpose, long before the emergence of any known civilization in the region. The oldest confirmed culture in Japan, the Jomon, dates back to around 14,000 years before the present, but the earliest phases of their society are thought to have been simple and nomadic. The monument, if man-made, suggests a far more advanced community living along the ancient coast, one that possessed both engineering skill and spiritual vision. The dating of the site remains uncertain. Kimura proposed that it was built at least 10,000 years ago, based on the depth of submersion and sea level data. If correct, it would make the monument contemporary with Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and older than the pyramids by 7 millennia. Other researchers have suggested more recent dates, pointing out that tectonic shifts in the Ryukyu Trench could have caused rapid subsidence independent of global sea rise. But even then, the formation would have been above water within the last 12,000 years, precisely the period when post-Ice Age floods were transforming coastlines across the planet. Divers describe the experience of approaching the Yonaguni monument as otherworldly. The light filters down in shifting gold and blue. The terraces rise from the seabed like the skeleton of a mountain, their steps covered with coral and sea fans. Fish glide through the corridors where wind might once have blown. The water moves softly through cracks and channels that resemble doorways. It feels like swimming through memory itself, an architecture of stone and silence built by hands or by nature, no one can say. The monument is not alone. Around it lie other formations, pillars, standing stones, and what appears to be a road connecting multiple sites. Kimura identified 10 distinct structures within a 1-kilometer radius, suggesting that Yonaguni may have been part of a larger complex. If so, then the underwater city described in local Okinawan folklore may not be entirely imaginary. The islanders tell of a place called Ryugu, the dragon palace beneath the sea, a realm of the gods where time flows differently. It is said that those who enter its halls forget the world above. Such tales, handed down through generations, may preserve distant memories of the time when the sea claimed the land. As the investigation continues, the scientific community remains divided. Many archaeologists refuse to classify Yonaguni as a human construction without direct artifacts, tools, pottery, or bones that can confirm human presence. Yet these may well exist, still buried beneath layers of coral and sediment. The challenge of underwater excavation is immense. The currents are strong, visibility is low, and each dive must balance discovery against risk. For now, the site remains an open question, suspended between geology and archaeology. The possibility that humans shaped Yonaguni fits within a larger pattern emerging from around the world. From the coasts of India to the Caribbean, similar anomalies lie beneath shallow seas. Stone alignments, terraces, and walls that suggest lost settlements. The pattern aligns perfectly with what we know about post-Ice Age flooding. It is as if pieces of an older puzzle have been scattered across the ocean floor, waiting for rediscovery. Even if Yonaguni turns out to be natural, its significance endures. It reminds us how much of Earth's story lies hidden beneath the water, how fragile the evidence of human history truly is. The difference between a natural formation and a monument can be only a few blows of a hammer, a few carvings in stone, and yet those few marks are enough to carry meaning through millennia. If people once walked these terraces before the waves came, their legacy is still here, eroded but not erased. The monument has become a symbol for a broader mystery, the possibility that civilizations of the Ice Age were more advanced than we imagine. It stands as a counterpart to Göbekli Tepe, one on land, one beneath the sea, both dating to the same age of transition, both expressing the human urge to build, to remember, to defy oblivion. They are the bookends of a forgotten epoch, the last whispers of a world that drowned. When the currents flow over the terraces of Yonaguni, they create low, resonant tones, a natural hum that divers can hear faintly through their equipment. Some call it the voice of the monument, others say it is the sea itself, still speaking the language of stone. In those sounds, in the play of light and shadow across ancient steps, we glimpse something larger than archaeology, a conversation between earth and time, between creation and destruction. If Yonaguni was once a city, then it was among the first to fall to the flood. If it was a temple, it was built to honor the forces that would one day consume it. And if it was only rock shaped by nature, then it remains a monument nonetheless. To the mystery of perception, to the fine line between pattern and purpose. What we can say for certain is that the site sits precisely where history meets myth. It is the physical embodiment of the drowned world, a place where the story of the flood becomes real, where the boundary between geology and memory dissolves into blue water. And in that sense, Yonaguni belongs not only to Japan, but to all of humanity, for it speaks of our shared origin and our shared amnesia. The divers who rise from its depths often describe a feeling of melancholy, as if they have glimpsed something they were never meant to see. Perhaps they have, for if Yonaguni is the echo of a world that ended 12,000 years ago, then it is also a mirror of our own. The seas are rising once more, the climate shifting again, and the past may soon repeat itself. The monument is not only a mystery, it is a warning written in stone. From the deep silence of Yonaguni, the path of our investigation widens. The patterns found here, the precision, the geometry, the alignment to nature, appear again across the world. Peru, Egypt, Malta, Turkey, all bear the same architectural fingerprints, as though fragments of one forgotten tradition scattered with the tides. To follow that pattern is to search for the thread connecting every megalith ever raised, every temple ever aligned with the stars. The next step leads away from the sea and across continents, into the highlands and deserts where stone still stands in the sun. There, in the ruins of Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and the Giza Plateau, we find the same signatures carved in different tongues, the marks of a knowledge that may have survived the flood. And so our journey continues, from the depths of the ocean to the mountains of stone, in search of the global pattern that binds them all. From the misted highlands of Peru to the desert plateaus of Egypt, from the limestone ridges of Turkey to the island temples of Malta, there runs a thread, a hidden geometry linking stones separated by oceans and millennia. The monuments of the ancient world, though distant in space and time, share a language that transcends culture. Their walls rise in silence, their alignments point to the heavens, and their stones fit together with a precision that mocks the centuries between them. These are not the works of chance, they are signatures, fragments of an inherited science passed from hand to hand after the flood. Standing before the walls of Sacsayhuaman in the Peruvian Andes, one feels the same quiet astonishment as at Göbekli Tepe or Yonaguni. The stones here are enormous, some weighing more than 100 tons, yet they fit so tightly that a single sheet of paper cannot slip between them. Their edges curve in complex polygons, each piece locking into the next like a puzzle. There is no mortar, only perfection. The stones have survived earthquakes that shattered modern buildings. Their seams have not shifted in 500 years since the fall of the Inca, and perhaps much longer. The mystery is not merely in the scale, but in the method. How were such surfaces shaped, smoothed and fitted with no metal tools? In Ollantaytambo, not far from Sacsayhuaman, massive blocks of pink granite stand aligned along the mountain slope, their faces cut with razor-like straightness. One of the most famous, the Wall of the Six Monoliths, consists of slabs each weighing over 50 tons. They were quarried from a site across the valley, more than 6 kilometers away, then hauled up steep terrain that would challenge modern cranes. At the quarry, unfinished stones still lie abandoned, suggesting the builders halted their work suddenly. Perhaps the project was interrupted by the very cataclysm that ended the Ice Age. The Inca later claimed these works were the legacy of the gods, the Viracochas, who built long before their own ancestors arrived. Across the Atlantic, in Egypt, the same mastery reappears. At Aswan, the ancient quarry reveals an unfinished obelisk, weighing more than 1,000 tons. Its surface is smooth and even, its separation from the bedrock incomplete, as though abandoned mid-cut. The precision of the cut lines has long puzzled engineers. Copper tools, which are soft compared to granite, could not produce such clean results without centuries of wear. Some researchers suggest the Egyptians used pounding stones, others propose abrasive sand techniques. Yet none explain how such a massive block could have been lifted and transported hundreds of kilometers north to Giza had it been finished. At the base of the Great Pyramid, the same enigma unfolds. The limestone foundation blocks fit together with uncanny accuracy. Some joints are less than a millimeter wide. The pyramid's base is aligned to true north with an error of only a few arc minutes, more precise than most modern buildings. The internal passages display straightness measurable only with laser instruments. The question is not whether the Egyptians were capable, but where they acquired the knowledge of geometry, surveying, and orientation necessary for such feats at the dawn of their civilization. The oldest texts we have described these techniques as inherited, not invented. The Egyptians spoke of a time called Zep Tepe, the first time, when gods or divine teachers raised the first temples after a great flood. To them, the pyramids were not the beginning of architecture, but its restoration. Travel east across the Mediterranean, and another example awaits. On the island of Malta, the megalithic temples of Hagar Kim and Menajdra rise from the rocky landscape facing the sea. They date to around 5,000 years before the present, older than the pyramids, and are constructed from limestone blocks weighing up to 50 tons. The layout of Menajdra is astronomically aligned. During the equinoxes, sunlight passes directly through the central doorway and illuminates a sacred chamber. During the solstices, the beams strike the edges of side altars with geometric precision. The builders of Malta understood both solar movement and structural resonance. The stones produce deep harmonic tones when struck, suggesting that the temples were designed not only for visual alignment, but also for acoustic effect. Sound, light, and geometry merged into one unified science. These patterns, precision stonework, astronomical alignment, and acoustic resonance appear again and again across continents and ages. They are too consistent to be coincidence. The knowledge encoded in these structures seems to belong to a tradition that predated them all. It is as if a single idea, born in the shadow of the Ice Age, traveled with humanity as it rebuilt after the flood. Each culture expressed it in its own language, yet the core remained unchanged. The universe could be measured, and stone could preserve that measure against the decay of time. The question, of course, is how such knowledge could have spread when oceans separated these peoples. Conventional history tells us that long-distance contact between the old and new worlds did not exist before the 15th century. Yet the evidence in stone suggests a deeper connection. The same polygonal masonry found in Peru appears at sites in Japan, Egypt, and Turkey. The same solar alignments recur in the Andes, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. Even the orientation of certain temples toward specific stars, Sirius, Orion, the Pleiades, echoes across continents. These constellations were worshipped as divine in nearly every ancient culture, as though they carried a shared significance remembered from an earlier age. One possibility is that this knowledge did not require contact in the conventional sense. It may have been passed through memory, myth, and migration after the flood. Survivors from coastal civilizations could have carried fragments of their understanding inland, where it became the foundation for new societies. Over generations, the technical details may have faded into ritual, leaving behind only the symbols, the serpent, the sun disk, the alignment to the equinox. These became the universal languages of sacred architecture, repeated long after their original meaning was forgotten. Another possibility, more provocative, is that the Ice Age world was far more interconnected than we assume. The rising seas may have erased not only cities, but the trade routes and maritime cultures that linked them. Ancient mariners could have traveled along coastlines now submerged, carrying ideas as they went. In this model, the similarities between megalithic sites are not coincidences, but fossils of a lost global exchange network. The flood did not create the first world, it destroyed it. Whatever the truth, the engineering techniques themselves remain astonishing. At Sacsayhuaman and Ollantay Tambo, the stones show signs of thermal alteration, as if softened before being fitted together. The surfaces sometimes display vitrification, a glass-like sheen caused by extreme heat. This has led to speculation that ancient builders may have used techniques involving fire, water, or even vibrational energy to shape stone. While such claims stretch beyond current evidence, they reflect an undeniable fact. The precision achieved by these builders remains difficult to replicate even with modern technology. The same precision appears in Egypt's Old Kingdom granite boxes, in the cutting of basalt floors, and in the perfectly drilled cores found in the ruins of ancient quarries. These cores display spiral tool marks with uniform depth and pitch, resembling modern machine drilling. In Peru, similar boreholes exist in hard andesite rock. In India, at sites like Ellora and Mahabalipuram, entire temples were carved from single pieces of granite with symmetrical perfection. Everywhere we look, the story repeats, advanced craftsmanship appearing suddenly without apparent evolution from simpler methods. The most striking feature of this global pattern is its relationship to the sky. Every major megalithic culture oriented its monuments towards celestial events. The builders of Stonehenge tracked the solstices. The Egyptians aligned the pyramids with Orion's belt. The Maltese and Andean temples mark the equinox sunrise. Even Göbekli Tepe, the oldest of them all, may encode constellations within its carvings. This obsession with the heavens suggests a unified worldview, a belief that earth and sky were reflections of one another, that by measuring the stars one could measure the divine order of the cosmos. Some researchers call this idea the as above, so below principle, the foundation of ancient sacred geometry. It posits that the patterns of the universe are mirrored in the structures of nature and the designs of human hands. The same ratios found in planetary orbits appear in temple layouts. The same spirals seen in galaxies emerge in seashells and architecture alike. To the builders of the ancient world, mathematics was not an abstract language, it was the pulse of creation itself. If such a philosophy originated before the flood, it would explain why its echoes are found everywhere. The survivors who carried it would have preserved the idea, even when the materials and methods were lost. Over time, the spiritual meaning survived where the science did not. The serpent, the circle, the sacred measure, all became metaphors for the harmony once understood directly. Modern science is beginning to rediscover some of these ancient principles. The study of resonance shows that vibration can alter matter at molecular scales. Acoustic levitation, though small in modern experiments, demonstrates that sound can counter gravity. Cymatics reveals that frequency produces geometric patterns in dust and water, echoing the designs found in megalithic art. While there is no proof that the ancients harnessed such forces, their fascination with sound and vibration suggests they knew more than we assume. They built structures that amplify and carry low-frequency tones, perhaps to connect human ritual with the natural resonance of the earth itself. Across continents, the story remains the same. Humanity rose from the flood already in possession of knowledge it could not have invented overnight. The megaliths of the post-flood world, Egypt, Peru, Malta and others, may therefore represent not beginnings but memories. They are attempts to reconstruct what was lost, to rebuild from fragments of an older science preserved in myth. In the temples of Egypt, inscriptions speak of builders from the first time, the followers of Horus, who restored order after the chaos of the flood. In Andean legend, the god Viracocha emerged from the waters to teach the survivors how to build and farm again. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerian kings who ruled before the deluge were said to have reigned for thousands of years, as if time itself flowed differently in the age before the flood. All these traditions converge on the same theme: a world destroyed and rebuilt, guided by remnants of its former glory. The stones themselves are the only impartial witnesses. They tell us that human intelligence, creativity, and engineering genius existed long before the first empires rose. They show that the will to endure, to measure, to align, to carve meaning into the earth, survived the flood and became the foundation of every later civilization. Whether by lost technology, divine inspiration, or the simple persistence of memory, the builders of the ancient world carried forward the spark of a forgotten age. And so the pattern continues, stretching across time like a constellation drawn in stone. The next step in our journey is to return to the moment when that pattern nearly vanished, the cataclysm that ended the Ice Age. For, if the flood erased an epoch of architecture, it also forged the legends of cities swallowed by the sea and of worlds reborn from ruin. The Great Flood was not only a natural disaster, it was the turning point of human history, the boundary between myth and memory. To understand what came after, we must return to the event itself, the fall of the stone cities. The world ended in water. It did not happen in a single night, nor in a single storm, but through a series of cataclysms that reshaped the face of the earth. The end of the Ice Age was the beginning of everything we call history, but also the grave of everything that came before. The glaciers melted, the seas rose, and what had been the cradle of humanity became its tomb. The Great Flood was not a legend. It was a memory of survival written into every myth, every sacred text, every whisper that reached across millennia. 12,800 years ago, something struck the planet. The evidence is scattered across continents, microscopic diamonds, layers of soot, and deposits of nanospheres formed under extreme heat. In the sediments of North America and Greenland lies a thin black mat, a geological scar marking the start of what scientists call the Younger Dryas. Before it, the world had been warming gently after the long Ice Age. Then almost overnight, the temperature plummeted, glaciers re-advanced, and megafauna vanished. The cause remains debated. Perhaps a comet broke apart in the atmosphere, or perhaps volcanic eruptions dimmed the sun. Whatever happened, it was violent enough to reset the climate for more than 1,000 years. When the cold finally ended, the warmth returned with equal ferocity. The ice sheets that had covered half the northern hemisphere began to collapse. Vast lakes trapped within them burst in sudden torrents. Water roared across the continents, carving immense canyons and leaving behind channels so vast they could only have been formed by forces beyond imagination. In North America, the Missoula floods swept through what is now Washington and Oregon, releasing flows that moved at 100 kilometers per hour and carried icebergs the size of buildings. In Eurasia, the melting of Lake Agassiz sent trillions of tons of fresh water into the Atlantic, disrupting ocean currents and triggering further chaos. The rising seas were relentless. Between 15,000 and 8,000 years before the Common Era, the global ocean level rose by about 120 meters. That is the equivalent of filling every coastal plain on Earth with a wall of water higher than a 30-story building. The process was not steady but occurred in bursts known as meltwater pulses. Each pulse raised the seas by several meters within a single human lifetime. To those who lived through it, the change must have seemed apocalyptic. Rivers turned into bays, valleys became gulfs, mountains became islands, entire ecosystems vanished beneath the waves. Imagine a city built at the edge of an Ice Age coast, a settlement of stone and wood, perhaps with harbours for fishing boats and plazas for rituals beneath the stars. The inhabitants would have watched the tides creep higher each year, marking the encroaching sea with despair. Their myths would speak of gods who demanded sacrifice, of suns that burned too hot, of omens written in the sky. And then, one day, the water would come faster than anyone could flee. A tsunami, born of collapsing ice or of a quake in the deep ocean, would rise over the horizon. The roar would be deafening. The sea would turn to a wall of white, swallowing everything in its path. When the waters receded, there would be nothing left. No temples, no homes, only silence. This is the scene echoed in the flood legends of every ancient culture. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim survives the deluge that destroys the cities of men. In the Hebrew scriptures, Noah builds an ark to save life from divine wrath. In India, Manu receives a warning from a god in the form of a fish and preserves the seeds of creation. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha float in a chest across the endless sea. Even in the high Andes, far from any ocean, the Aymara speak of a time when the world drowned, leaving only a few who escaped to the mountains. The same story repeats because the same event was witnessed by all. The flood was not only an act of destruction, it was the crucible of memory. Those who survived carried fragments of their knowledge inland, up river valleys and into plateaus. They became the teachers and founders of the next civilizations. The myths of divine instructors, the Apkallu of Sumer, the Nettas of Egypt, the Viracochas of the Andes, may all refer to these survivors. They were remembered as gods not because they were supernatural, but because they preserved the wisdom of the drowned world. They knew how to build, how to measure the sky, how to carve stone. Wherever they went, they re-established the arts of civilization among people who had lost them. Archaeology offers faint glimpses of this transition. Around 11,000 years before the Common Era, as the floodwaters stabilized, new cultures appeared almost simultaneously in distant regions. In the Fertile Crescent, the Natufians began cultivating wild grains, laying the foundations of agriculture. In South America, early societies domesticated potatoes and llamas. In China, rice was first grown along the Yangtze River. This sudden flowering of innovation, occurring independently, yet in the same window of time, suggests that humanity was rebuilding from a shared disruption. The flood had scattered the seeds of progress, and now they sprouted again. But the trauma of the event lingered. For generations, the memory of the drowned world haunted human imagination. The sea became a symbol of chaos, of forces beyond control. Ancient languages gave names to this power. The Sumerians called it Abzu, the Egyptians Nun, the Greeks Oceanus. In every mythology, the waters represented both destruction and creation, the womb and the grave. The flood was remembered not only as punishment, but as renewal, the end of one age and the beginning of another. The physical evidence of that age still lies hidden beneath modern seas. Sonar mapping reveals submerged landscapes, where rivers once flowed and forests once stood. In the North Sea, divers have recovered antlers, tools and hearthstones from Doggerland. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Kambat, underwater surveys show geometric patterns consistent with ancient settlements now buried under silt. Near Japan's Yonaguni Island, terraces and columns rise from the seabed, perhaps the remains of the very cities that fell when the flood came. Each discovery adds weight to the idea that the legends of the drowned world were not allegories, but history remembered through the lens of myth. Geologists studying the aftermath of the meltwater floods have found evidence of rapid climatic oscillations. As fresh water poured into the oceans, it disrupted the thermohaline circulation that drives global currents. This caused sudden temperature swings and chaotic weather patterns. For the people who lived then, the sky itself seemed unstable. Storms raged for weeks. Icebergs drifted into temperate waters. The seasons lost their rhythm. The environment turned hostile, forcing entire populations to migrate. It was a planetary upheaval, a reshaping of Earth that left scars still visible today. The fall of the stone cities was therefore both literal and symbolic. The physical structures of the old world were drowned, but the ideas survived. In the centuries after the flood, new monuments rose from the mud, built in imitation of those that had been lost. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the pyramids of Egypt, the step temples of Mesoamerica, all may be echoes of pre-flood prototypes remembered through oral tradition. Each generation sought to rebuild what the waters had taken, to reassert control over the forces that had once destroyed them. The flood also marked a profound shift in human consciousness. Before it, the world had seemed eternal. Afterward, humanity understood impermanence. The awareness that the earth could change so drastically gave rise to religion, to astronomy, to architecture designed to outlast disaster. Stone became the symbol of endurance. The builders of Göbekli Tepe, working just after the deluge, carved their temple as if in defiance of oblivion. Later, the Egyptians would call their monuments places of eternity, designed to survive the cycles of destruction and rebirth. The flood had taught them that only what is written in stone endures. Even in our own time, the echo of that lesson remains. We build monuments to defy time, skyscrapers and memorials to hold our stories against the tide of entropy. Yet the planet still moves according to the same rhythms. Ice still melts, seas still rise. The Great Flood may not have been the last, only the most devastating in memory. Climate, geology, and human civilization remain bound in the same fragile dance. Modern science can now measure what ancient people only felt. Satellite data show that the polar ice continues to shrink. Oceans expand, coastlines erode, and storms grow in strength. The same processes that drowned Doggerland and Sunderland are happening. Again, though this time by our own hand. The story of the flood is repeating itself, a warning written not in myth but in mathematics. We stand, as our ancestors once did, at the edge of the rising sea. The Great Flood and the fall of the stone cities were not merely historical events, they were transformations of human identity. Out of the ruins of that drowned world came the spark of civilization. The survivors became builders, priests, and storytellers. They measured time by the stars and built temples aligned with the sun, preserving memory and geometry. They turned catastrophe into creation. That perhaps is the true legacy of the flood, not destruction, but rebirth. When we gaze upon the megaliths that survived, the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, the terraces of Yonaguni, the walls of Sacsayhuaman, we are seeing the resilience of the human spirit made solid. Each stone is a defiance of the sea, a declaration that memory can outlast water. The flood may have erased the cities of the old world, but it could not erase the will to remember. As the waters receded and the earth found balance once more, humanity began to rebuild. New cities rose where the old had sunk. The survivors of the flood became the founders of history's first civilizations, carrying with them faint memories of an age when gods and men built side by side. The flood had washed the slate clean, but beneath the mud, the blueprint of the past remained. And so, out of the drowned world, the reconstruction began. Egypt rose from the desert, Sumer from the rivers, the Indus from the monsoon plains, and the Andes from the high plateaus. Each carried echoes of the same lost science, the same geometry, the same yearning to restore what had been. The flood did not end civilization. It gave birth to the one we know. When the waters finally withdrew and the skies cleared, the survivors of the Great Flood looked upon a world both familiar and alien. The land had changed, the coastlines were gone, the forests rearranged, the climate strange and unstable. Yet the stars above were the same, eternal witnesses to the rise and fall of worlds. Humanity began again, carrying within its collective mind the faint memories of an age before destruction. The flood had swept away the old order, but not the instinct to build. From that instinct came the Reconstruction Age, the rebirth of civilization from memory. In the centuries that followed the deluge, people across the planet began to settle once more. They cleared the valleys newly freed from ice, planted the first fields and raised the first walls. But they did not start from nothing. The builders of the post-flood world inherited fragments of knowledge too advanced to have been discovered overnight. Geometry, astronomy, and architecture appeared together like sparks rekindled from a buried flame. This was not invention, it was remembrance. The first lights of that rebirth appeared in the land we now call Mesopotamia, the plain between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. There, around 6,000 years before the Common Era, a culture arose that called itself Sumer. The Sumerians spoke of kings who had ruled before the flood, whose names were written on tablets preserved from the waters. They described a lineage of wisdom descending from the gods who had once walked among them. Their earliest cities, Eridu, Uruk, and Ur, were laid out with precision, aligned to cardinal directions. Their temples rose in stepped terraces called ziggurats, echoing the form of mountains and perhaps the shape of memory itself. In those temples, priests recorded the movements of stars and planets with mathematical accuracy. They invented writing not as poetry but as record, a way to preserve the memory that water could no longer wash away. Their number system was based on 60, a design perfectly suited to the measurement of circles and time. That system still governs our clocks and geometry today. The Sumerians did not stumble into civilization. They built it deliberately, guided by principles that seemed to come from somewhere older. Across the desert to the west, another legacy was stirring. Along the Nile, people gathered to cultivate the fertile banks left by the receding floodwaters. Over generations, small villages grew into the first proto-kingdoms of Egypt. Around 3,100 years before the Common Era, these kingdoms united under the first pharaoh, Menes, and a civilization unlike any other emerged. From the very beginning, it displayed an astonishing maturity. The earliest pyramids were not crude experiments, but precise achievements. The alignment of the Great Pyramid's base to true north is so exact that modern compasses are less accurate. Its dimensions encode mathematical ratios related to the curvature of the Earth and the length of the solar year. Egypt did not evolve its genius slowly, it appeared fully formed. The Egyptians themselves explained this sudden brilliance through myth. They spoke of Tepe, the first time, when divine beings known as the Neters brought order to chaos after the Great Flood. These Neters taught humanity the arts of writing, measurement, and construction. They built the first temples as models of the cosmos, aligned to the stars of Orion and Sirius. The pharaohs who ruled later were seen not as innovators but as restorers, keeping alive the architecture of eternity. Far to the west, across the ocean that had once been a land bridge, the same impulse took shape in the mountains of South America. The Andean civilizations, long before the rise of the Inca, built megalithic structures that rivaled anything in the Old World. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, near the shores of Lake Titicaca, stones weighing more than 100 tons lie cut with geometric precision. Some are shaped into perfect right angles, their surfaces so smooth they appear machined. The blocks interlock through complex grooves, as if part of a system designed for both strength and beauty. Local legend attributes the site to the god Viracocha, who emerged from the waters after the flood to teach humans how to rebuild their world. The resemblance between these distant cultures is striking. Each spoke of gods who rose from the sea or sky to restore knowledge. Each built monuments aligned with celestial patterns. Each measured time by the motion of the sun, moon, and stars. And each regarded architecture as a sacred act, a way of anchoring eternity to Earth. The flood had wiped the slate clean, but the survivors had drawn upon memory to recreate what was lost. Archaeologists once believed these civilizations developed independently, separated by oceans and centuries. But the deeper we dig, the less isolation we find. The mathematics of the Sumerians appear again in Egyptian pyramid design. The astronomical alignments of the Nile temples mirror those of Andean sanctuaries. Even the construction techniques, the polygonal masonry, the interlocking blocks, the use of acoustic chambers, share uncanny similarities. These parallels suggest not direct contact, but a shared inheritance, a deep memory carried across generations from the Ice Age world. It is possible that the Reconstruction Age began with small groups of survivors, families, tribes, perhaps even priest engineers, who carried fragments of ancient knowledge inland as the seas rose. They settled in valleys and deserts, places untouched by the flood. Over centuries, they taught their descendants what they remembered: how to track the stars, how to shape stone, how to read the rhythms of nature. Each region adapted this inheritance to its own environment, creating the diversity of ancient cultures we now study. But beneath the diversity lies a common origin. In Egypt, the preservation of memory became religion. The pharaohs built tombs not as graves, but as machines of resurrection, aligned to the circumpolar stars. The walls of their temples were covered with hieroglyphs describing the voyage of the soul through the afterlife, a symbolic reenactment of the flood and rebirth of the cosmos. The entire civilization was structured around the concept of cyclical renewal. To the Egyptians, time itself was a river flowing in endless return. In Sumer, memory became mathematics. The scribes turned the heavens into numbers, calculating planetary cycles and recording eclipses with astonishing precision. Their myths, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, retold the story of the flood not as moral punishment, but as cosmic reset. The flood was the dividing line between the age of gods and the age of men. To live after it was to rebuild under the weight of memory. In the Andes, memory became architecture. The builders of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku treated stone as living matter, shaping it to mirror the heavens. Their temples were aligned to solstices, and their courtyards reflected the geometry of constellations. The myths of Viracocha describe the god walking across the land after the flood, bringing light and order. His image, carved on the gateway of the sun, holds a staff in each hand, symbols of measurement. It is as if he represents the rebirth of civilization itself, the return of geometry to a world washed clean. Even in distant cultures, the same themes persist. In China, ancient texts speak of Yu the Great, who tamed the waters after a world flood and restored balance through engineering. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl brought the calendar and the arts after the destruction of the previous age. In India, the survivors of Manu's flood established the lineages that would create the Vedic tradition. Everywhere, the reconstruction was guided by knowledge remembered, not invented. Modern archaeology calls this period the Neolithic Revolution, the transition from hunting and gathering to farming and city building. But the term conceals the mystery at its heart. Why did humanity leap so suddenly from scattered tribes to organized civilization? Why did agriculture, architecture, and astronomy emerge together, almost simultaneously, in regions separated by thousands of kilometers? The conventional answer is coincidence. The alternative is continuity. If the Great Flood marked the end of the Ice Age world, then the Reconstruction Age was its rebirth. The survivors may have carried oral traditions describing the lost lands, the drowned coasts, and the techniques that once allowed them to thrive. As they rebuilt, those memories became myths, their technologies became rituals, and their mathematics became sacred. Civilization, in this view, is not a sudden invention, but a slow remembering. The first temples of the Reconstruction Age were not houses for gods, but libraries of stone. Their alignments encoded the turning of the earth, the precession of the stars, and the rhythm of the seasons. To enter them was to step into a map of the cosmos. Every carving, every wall, every shadow at equinox carried meaning. The builders were reconstructing the world from geometry, using the heavens as their blueprint. In this way, architecture became the bridge between the lost and the living. Even today, the precision of their work humbles us. The Great Pyramid's base, the ziggurats of Ur, the temples of Karnak and Tiwanaku, all share a mathematical grace that modern engineers still struggle to explain. It is as though the survivors of the flood were determined to create structures that could never again be erased. They built in stone because they knew the power of water. They aligned to the stars because they knew the sky alone was eternal. As centuries passed, the original purpose of these monuments faded. What had been sciences became religions. What had been engineering became ritual. The temples that once served as observatories turned into places of worship. Yet the stones endured, carrying within them the silent language of the age before memory. When we study them today, we are reading the last pages of a book written in a tongue we barely understand. The Reconstruction Age was humanity's second beginning. It proved that even after destruction, knowledge can rise again. The flood had erased the cities of the First World, but it could not erase the mind that built them. Out of the mud and the ashes, humans remembered who they were. They built again, not as wanderers, but as creators. The monuments they left behind still stand as proof that memory is stronger than time, and yet, behind their triumphs lies a question that still haunts us. If these civilizations were rebuilders, not inventors, what exactly were they rebuilding? How much of their legacy belongs to the survivors of a world we no longer remember? The next chapter leads us into that memory itself, the story of the lost land that may have been the source of it all, the island beyond the horizon that sank beneath the waves. The world has called it many names, but one echoes louder than all the rest. Across the centuries, one name has come to symbolize the memory of a world lost to the sea: Atlantis. To some, it is a fable of pride and punishment. To others, a veiled recollection of a real civilization that perished when the flood came. The story has survived for more than 2,000 years, retold by philosophers, explorers, and dreamers. Yet beneath its mythic surface lies a riddle too persistent to ignore. What if Atlantis was not invention but memory, the echo of an Ice Age world erased by the rising tides? The tale begins not with a poet or prophet, but with a philosopher. Around the 4th century before the Common Era, the Greek thinker Plato recorded the story of Atlantis in 2 dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. He claimed that the account came from Solon, an Athenian lawgiver who had heard it from Egyptian priests at Sais, who in turn preserved it from records older still. According to them, Atlantis was a great island kingdom that existed 9,000 years before Plato's own time, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the strait we now call Gibraltar. It was a realm of wealth, knowledge, and power, ruled by 10 kings descended from the sea god Poseidon. Its people built magnificent temples, palaces, and harbors, their capital arranged in concentric rings of land and water. But in their arrogance, they waged war against the world, and the gods punished them. In a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis sank into the sea and vanished. Most historians treat Plato's story as allegory, a moral lesson on the dangers of hubris. Yet his description is unusually detailed, more precise than any mythic parable. He gives measurements, geography, and lineage. He describes mountains rich in minerals, elephants roaming the plains, and canals engineered for navigation. He names the date of its fall, 9,000 years before his time, around 9,600 years before the Common Era, the same epoch that marks the end of the Ice Age and the rise of Göbekli Tepe. The coincidence is too precise to dismiss lightly. Could Plato have preserved a memory of a real event told through the lens of philosophy? The search for Atlantis has drawn explorers across the world. Some place it in the Mediterranean, others in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, or beneath the Antarctic ice. The most conservative theories locate it near the Aegean island of Santorini, known to the ancients as Thera, which was devastated by a massive volcanic eruption around 1600 years before the Common Era. That eruption destroyed the Minoan civilization and left a submerged caldera resembling Plato's rings. To many scholars, this explains the story, but the timeline does not fit. Plato's Atlantis fell nearly 8,000 years earlier, during the final melting of the Ice Age. His island was not a small Mediterranean culture, but a vast realm beyond the known world. If we look beyond the literal geography, a pattern emerges. During the I period Plato describes, global sea levels were still rising. Entire coastlines disappeared. The Atlantic basin itself underwent dramatic transformation as the last ice collapsed from the North American continent. If an advanced coastal civilization had existed then, perhaps on the now submerged shelves of the Atlantic, it would have been among the first casualties of the flood. the memory of its destruction could easily have traveled east, carried by survivors to the shores of the Mediterranean, where it entered Egyptian lore and, through them, Greek philosophy. In this view, Atlantis is not a place but a memory of the entire drowned world. Still, traces remain that tempt belief. Off the coast of Spain, near Cadiz, underwater formations resembling concentric structures have been identified by satellite imaging. In the Azores, mid-Atlantic islands, once part of a larger volcanic plateau, show signs of ancient collapse. In the Caribbean, the so-called Bimini Road, rows of rectangular stones off the Bahamas, suggests human construction, though skeptics argue they are natural beach rock formations. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar surveys have detected symmetrical shapes on the ocean floor at depths far too great for any known civilization. None of these discoveries alone prove anything, but together they form a pattern that mirrors Plato's vision, the remnants of a world swallowed by the sea. Geology adds another layer of intrigue. The Azores Plateau sits atop the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a region of tectonic instability. Around 12,000 years ago, rapid shifts in sea level and crustal stress could have caused landslides or subsidence events capable of sinking land masses. While not on the scale of the mythical island, such events could easily have erased coastal settlements. The same process occurred around the world: the Storegga Slide off Norway, the collapse of Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, the flooding of the Persian Gulf Basin. These were not isolated disasters, they were global. Plato's Atlantis may be the Mediterranean memory of this planetary transformation. In the myth, Atlantis was not merely rich, it was enlightened. Its people understood astronomy, architecture, and the laws of nature. They harnessed energy from the earth and sea. They were said to have built their city with a harmony that reflected the order of the cosmos. This description resonates with the ancient worldview of sacred geometry, where the design of human structures mirrors the design of the universe. Such a philosophy, found in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Andes, may have been the intellectual inheritance of that forgotten age. If so, the Atlanteans were not gods, but the ancestors of the builders who would later raise the world's first temples. Plato writes that the Atlanteans fell when their virtue decayed, when greed and power overtook wisdom. The gods withdrew their favor, and the earth swallowed them. This moral dimension may conceal a deeper truth. The cataclysm that ended the Ice Age was not divine punishment, but natural inevitability. Yet to those who lived through it, it would have felt like judgment. The sun grew hotter, the storms fiercer, the sea rose without mercy. A society dependent on coastal prosperity would have seen its harbors vanish, its fields drowned, its temples torn apart by waves. What better way to explain such loss than to say that the gods themselves had turned away? Across cultures, the same narrative appears under different names. In Hindu tradition, the continent of Kumari Kandam sank beneath the Indian Ocean. In Southeast Asia, legends speak of the vanished land of Sundaland. In the Pacific, Polynesian lore recalls Hawaii, the ancestral homeland lost to the sea. In the west of Africa, the Dogon people tell of a star-born race who came from the water to teach humanity before their kingdom vanished beneath it. All these stories share the same outline: a golden age destroyed by flood, followed by the reawakening of survivors who rebuilt anew. Atlantis is simply the Greek name for this universal memory. If we treat myth as encrypted history, then Atlantis represents not one lost city but the culmination of a cycle, the rise and fall of civilizations bound to the rhythms of the planet. The flood that destroyed Atlantis also ended the Ice Age and began the modern era. The survivors of that transformation became the founders of Sumer, Egypt, and every civilization that followed. They carried fragments of the Atlantean legacy, transmuted through time into symbols, rituals, and architecture. The ziggurat, the pyramid, the temple aligned to the stars, all may descend from that original model of harmony between Earth and cosmos. The Egyptian priests who told Solon the story claimed that their own ancestors were among those survivors. They spoke of a time when the sea consumed great lands beyond the west, leaving only fragments of memory. The name Atlantis itself may have originated from the Egyptian term for the western lands, Ahamenpetar, later Hellenized into Atlantis. In their version, the destruction of that land marked the rebirth of Egypt. The floodwaters of the Nile became a symbol of both death and creation, the same duality found in every flood myth. Modern oceanography continues to reveal that the continental shelves around the world were once dry and habitable. In the Atlantic, particularly around the Azores and Canary Islands, the depth and structure of the seabed indicate that large areas were exposed during the Ice Age. The islands themselves are the mountaintops of a submerged plateau. If a maritime culture had existed there, it would now lie under hundreds of meters of water. The ruins would be buried beneath sediment, beyond easy reach of exploration. What we see in myth, therefore, may be the faint echo of geology, the human memory of continents lost to time. Some researchers suggest that the legacy of Atlantis lives on not in ruins but in ideas. The sudden appearance of advanced mathematics, astronomy and architecture in early civilizations hints at a continuity of knowledge. The Atlantean myth in this sense is not about a single place, but about the persistence of memory across cataclysm. The island may have sunk, but its science did not. It resurfaced wherever humanity rebuilt. There is a reason the myth endures. Atlantis speaks to a fear embedded deep in the human spirit, the awareness that our greatest achievements can vanish overnight, that nature remembers nothing of our monuments. It also speaks to hope, the belief that wisdom survives disaster, carried by those who remember. Every time we build higher, explore deeper, or measure the stars, we are reenacting the dream of Atlantis, reaching for a harmony that once was and might be again. Perhaps that is why the story refuses to die. Beneath the skepticism of scholars and the fantasies of seekers lies a truth that both can sense but neither can prove. The world before history was real. It ended in water, and what remained became the seed of everything that followed. If Atlantis existed, it was not a single island but a civilization of coasts, a network of cultures that thrived when the world was colder and the seas lower. Its fall was the culmination of the Ice Age's end, when the planet itself shifted. The survivors carried their knowledge east and west, planting it in the fertile valleys that would become the cradles of history. The memory of their homeland became legend. Its name, Atlantis, became a symbol not only of loss but of continuity. And so, the myth of the deep remains. The ocean still holds its secrets, its silence vast and ancient. Somewhere beneath the waves, beneath layers of silt and coral, lie the ruins of the first cities, the first maps, the first instruments that measured the stars. Whether we call them Atlantean or not, their makers were human, curious, creative, and defiant of time. The memory of Atlantis is therefore not about a place but about us. It is the story of our capacity to rise after ruin, to rebuild after loss, to preserve meaning against the tides of oblivion. The flood may come again, the seas may rise, but the will to remember endures. The stones of Göbekli Tepe, the terraces of Yonaguni, the walls of Egypt and Peru, they are all fragments of the same story, the same ancient memory carved in different tongues. As we look out across the modern ocean, glittering and restless, we are looking into the mirror of our past. Beneath that surface lies not only the bones of continents, but the echoes of who we once were. Plato's Atlantis may have vanished in a night of fire and water, but its reflection remains in every civilization that remembers the flood. The myth survives because it is not fantasy, it is prophecy. It reminds us that the earth remembers, even when we forget. And so the story of Atlantis does not end in the sea. It ends in us, in the builders, the dreamers, and the survivors who carry its memory forward. The island sank, but its spirit rose again in every temple aligned to the stars, in every city built on sacred measure, in every hand that shapes stone to defy time. The deep still whispers its name, and the world still listens. From the drowned realm of Atlantis, our path turns toward understanding. Myth and archaeology now converge, and the task before us is not to believe or disbelieve, but to discern, to separate memory from imagination, evidence from echo. The next chapter begins that work, weighing the facts against the stories, and asking the question that has haunted human curiosity for 12,000 years. The stones do not lie, but they do not speak clearly either. Every fragment of the past must be interpreted, and between discovery and understanding lies a gulf as deep as any sea. For centuries, humanity has sought to recover the lost world hinted at in myth, the pre-flood civilizations, the builders of impossible temples, the keepers of forgotten science. Yet archaeology, the discipline devoted to evidence, often stands in opposition to memory, the force that preserves myth. Between them stretches the frontier of human understanding, where fact and imagination blur like coastline under a rising tide. The modern science of archaeology was born not from faith in legend, but from skepticism. The 19th century unearthed Troy, once thought mythical, beneath layers of Anatolian soil. It revealed that myths can preserve kernels of truth long after their authors vanish. Since then, excavations across the world have brought the human timeline into sharper focus. We know now that our species, Homo sapiens, has existed for more than 300,000 years, that organized societies appeared within the last 12,000, and that what we call civilization is a brief flare in a vast chronology. Yet within that flare are anomalies, structures and artifacts that seem older than they should be, or too sophisticated for their supposed time. These are the cracks through which memory seeps back into history. The most undeniable of these anomalies is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Dated to around 9,600 years before the Common Era, it predates agriculture, pottery and writing. Its pillars, carved from limestone and arranged in circles, weigh up to 20 tons. Their surfaces are etched with foxes, vultures, scorpions and abstract symbols, some of which appear to align with constellations. The site was deliberately buried around 8,000 years before the Common Era, preserving it in perfect condition. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges its age, but not its implications. If hunter-gatherers could carve and raise megaliths of such precision, then civilization did not begin with farming. It began with architecture, with geometry, with a shared vision of order. Göbekli Tepe stands as proof that intelligence and organization existed long before the cities of Sumer or Egypt. Other sites extend this enigma. In the Gulf of Kambat, off the coast of India, sonar mapping in the early 21st century revealed linear formations stretching several kilometers, consistent with walls or foundations. Artifacts recovered from the seabed, including stone tools and fragments of pottery, have been dated to around 9,000 years before the Common Era. Critics argue that these are geological formations or misdated debris, but the possibility remains that an ancient settlement once stood there, perhaps one of the many coastal cities swallowed by post-glacial floods. In Japan, the underwater terraces of Yonaguni show steps, columns and platforms with right angles too precise to dismiss. Some geologists insist that natural sandstone fractures explain the shapes. Others, led by Professor Masaki Kimura, argue that human modification is evident. If so, Yonaguni may have been built when the sea level was lower, more than 10,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest monuments on Earth. Then there are the inland mysteries, megalithic sites that defy easy explanation. In Peru, the Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, stones weighing more than 100 tons are fitted together with joints so exact that even modern tools cannot reproduce them easily. In Egypt, the base platform of the Great Pyramid consists of limestone blocks cut with machine-like precision. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the foundation stones of the ancient temple weigh more than 800 tons each. Archaeologists attribute these works to later civilizations, yet the engineering principles seem inherited rather than invented. The more one compares these sites across continents, the more one senses a shared design language, one not limited by geography or chronology. Mainstream archaeology resists the idea of a lost pre-flood civilization, and with reason. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. To date, no verified artifact, inscription or ruin from before 10,000 years ago clearly demonstrates an urban society. The oldest known city, Jericho, dates to around 8,000 years before the Common Era. The earliest writing appears in Sumer around 3,200 years before the Common Era. Between these milestones lies a vast silence. That silence is where speculation thrives, but the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. More than 70% of early human habitation zones were coastal, and most of those coasts are now underwater, buried beneath silt and coral. Under such conditions, wood, clay, and metal perish quickly. Only stone endures, and even stone can crumble under 10,000 years of pressure. If an Ice Age civilization had existed primarily along now-drowned shorelines, its ruins would be beyond easy reach. The challenge is not that archaeology has disproven the theory, it is that the ocean has hidden the proof. Even so, there is a difference between scientific caution and dogmatic dismissal. Many archaeologists once denied that humans reached the Americas before 12,000 years ago, until sites like Monte Verde in Chile forced a revision. They denied that organized religion predated farming, until Göbekli Tepe proved otherwise. The history of archaeology itself is a record of humility, of being forced again and again to expand the timeline of human achievement. Each new discovery pushes the dawn of civilization farther back. It is not unreasonable to ask how far that dawn might yet extend. Still, the discipline must guard against imagination unanchored by evidence. The danger of the lost civilization hypothesis is that it can explain anything. If a site appears anomalous, one can always invoke a forgotten precursor. This makes it unfalsifiable and therefore unscientific. The real challenge lies in finding balance between open-mindedness and rigor, between myth and measurement. Archaeology advances through data, radiocarbon dates, stratigraphy, residue analysis, genetic sequencing. Myths may guide the search, but they cannot substitute for excavation. The key is to treat myth as a map, not as proof. When we do, patterns emerge that illuminate both sides of the divide. Myths of a global flood align with geological evidence of post-glacial sea level rise. Legends of sky gods correspond to the ancient obsession with astronomy. Tales of world trees, mountains, and sacred geometry echo the universal human tendency to model the cosmos in architecture. These correspondences suggest that myths preserve encoded memories of real experiences, filtered through generations of retelling. The flood stories of Sumer, India, Greece, and Mesoamerica may describe the same global event, the sudden meltwater surges that ended the Ice Age. But they also reveal how humans transform catastrophe into meaning. Some of the most compelling evidence for ancient sophistication lies not in ruins but in knowledge. The Sumerians understood precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, long before it was rediscovered by the Greeks. The Egyptians aligned temples with solstices and calculated the length of the year to within a fraction of a day. The builders of Stonehenge tracked lunar cycles with accuracy that suggests generations of observation. None of this requires a vanished super-civilization, but it does require acknowledging that early humans were far more observant and capable than we once assumed. Intelligence did not begin with modernity. It is as old as curiosity. Yet there remain mysteries that defy easy explanation. How did cultures separated by oceans develop the same architectural principles? Why do megalithic sites around the world share alignments with the same stars, Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades? Why do myths from every continent describe gods emerging from the sea after a great flood to teach agriculture, mathematics, and law? Coincidence is possible, but so is shared origin. The truth may lie in between, a network of migrations and exchanges during the Late Ice Age, when coastlines connected regions now divided by water. In that sense, the Lost World was not a single Atlantis, but a web of interconnected peoples whose memory survived in fragments. The scientific tools of the 21st century are beginning to bridge the gap between archaeology and myth. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and oceanic LiDAR scanning have revealed hidden structures beneath jungles and seas. Genetic studies trace human migrations back to Ice Age refuges, confirming that survivors of climatic chaos repopulated the Earth. Even linguistic analysis suggests deep common roots among ancient languages, hinting that our ancestors once shared a global vocabulary of symbols. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding how myth becomes history. The real task is not to choose between science and legend, but to reconcile them. Myth without evidence is fantasy. Evidence without meaning is data. When combined, they tell the full story of humanity, a species that remembers through imagination and records through stone. Archaeology can measure time, but only myth explains why time matters. The flood stories endure not because they describe physics, but because they describe loss, survival, and rebirth. They are as much emotional truth as geological record. In this light, the debate between skeptics and believers becomes less about who is right and more about what kind of truth we seek. The archaeologist demands proof in the soil. The storyteller finds proof in the soul. Both, in their own way, are digging in the same ground. Whether they were farmers on the hills of Anatolia or engineers of a drowned coast, they were the first to look at stone and see permanence, to look at the sky and see pattern. They were the first engineers of Earth, the ancestors of all who build, measure, and remember. Before history began, there were builders. Long before the first kings of Sumer wrote their names on clay, before Egypt raised its stone to the sun, before even the word civilization had meaning, human hands were shaping the world. They carved the hills, lifted the pillars, and mapped the heavens in stone. We have forgotten their names, but their work endures. They were the first engineers of Earth, the makers of memory itself. It began not with empire, but with observation. The Ice Age was ending, and the planet was changing faster than any generation had ever seen. The ice melted, the rivers swelled, and the stars shifted in the sky. The survivors of the flood looked upward and saw in those stars something permanent. Where the land had failed them, the sky offered constancy. The heavens became a clock by which to measure the chaos of Earth. In learning to read the stars, they learned to measure time. In measuring time, they learned to predict the world. Thus began science, not as theory, but as survival. The builders of the post-flood world inherited knowledge not easily gained. Geometry, measurement, balance, and the art of working with stone appeared in distant lands almost simultaneously. In Turkey, at Göbekli Tepe, the T-shaped pillars spoke a language of proportion and symmetry. In Egypt, the earliest temples were aligned to the rising of Sirius and the belt of Orion, their architecture reflecting the order of the cosmos. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman locked together with such precision that even a blade cannot pass between the stones. These are not coincidences. They are expressions of the same impulse to bring harmony to a planet recovering from chaos. The first engineers were not builders in the modern sense. They were philosophers in stone. To them, every measurement carried meaning. The circle represented eternity, the square stability, the triangle ascent. By combining these shapes, they mirrored the cycles of the heavens on Earth. Their temples were not shelters but instruments, observatories tuned to light, sound, and vibration. Some resonated at specific frequencies, amplifying chants in ways that seem almost acoustic engineering. Others tracked solstices so precisely that a beam of sunlight could pierce a chamber only once each year, marking the birth of a season. The builders knew the language of the cosmos, and they spoke it through architecture. What makes their work extraordinary is not its scale, but its intent. Each site, whether buried, broken, or still standing, shares the same purpose: to anchor humanity within the universe. At Göbekli Tepe, the carvings of animals and celestial symbols may represent constellations, suggesting that its builders mapped the sky 12,000 years ago. At Stonehenge, the alignment of lintels and posts marks the solstices, creating a calendar of light. In the temples of Karnak, the corridors focus the rising sun on the day of renewal. In the Andes, the city of Cusco was laid, out in the shape of a puma, its walls echoing the constellations above. Each monument was a bridge between heaven and earth, a declaration that even in ruin, order endures. Modern archaeologists measure these structures with lasers, drones, and algorithms, yet the mystery deepens, not lessens. The precision of their geometry remains unmatched. The base of the Great Pyramid deviates from true north by less than 3/60ths of a degree. The stones of Puma Punku fit together like puzzle pieces, their angles so perfect that they defy explanation by primitive tools. The causeways of Teotihuacan follow ratios that correspond to planetary orbits. These are not accidents of superstition. They are the fingerprints of minds that understood pattern at a cosmic scale. But who were they? Were they remnants of the drowned Ice Age cultures, the heirs of Atlantis, the wanderers who carried knowledge inland as the seas rose? Or were they simply humans like us, driven by the same curiosity, rediscovering what had once been lost? Perhaps the distinction is irrelevant. In every age, humanity rises, falls, and remembers. The builders were part of that eternal rhythm. They were not aliens, gods, or superhumans. They were us, before forgetting set in. To understand them, we must abandon the arrogance of modern progress. We assume that time moves forward, that knowledge accumulates, that the past was primitive. Yet the evidence tells another story. History is cyclical. Civilizations bloom, achieve mastery, and fade. Their ruins become the seeds of the next. The builders of the megaliths may have inherited fragments of an even older science, one lost to flood and fire. What we call progress is often only recovery. The first engineers measured the world not with machines but with meaning. They used the body as a unit, the cubit of the arm, the span of the hand, the step of the foot. They aligned their monuments not by compass but by the rising of stars. They built to harmonize with the Earth's magnetic field, its resonance, its pulse. Modern physics now recognizes that the planet vibrates at specific frequencies, that the Schumann resonance links Earth and atmosphere like a planetary heartbeat. The ancients may not have known the equations, but they felt the harmony. They built in accordance with it. Their temples were tuning forks between heaven and earth. Even their myths preserve the language of engineering. The Egyptian god Thoth was said to have measured the heavens and taught writing and architecture. The Sumerian Enki created order from chaos through mathematics. The Andean Viracocha carved the world with lines and light. These deities were personifications of intellect, memory, and measure. They were the engineers deified by their descendants. The first scientists turned into gods. What we worshipped was once what we built. Over time, the purpose of their monuments was forgotten. The alignments that once tracked the stars became rituals repeated without understanding. The measurements that once defined harmony became superstition. The engineers became priests and the knowledge became myth. Yet, even as meaning faded, the structures endured, carrying their code across millennia. Every generation rediscovered them and asked the same question: who built these and why? The answer lies not in mystery, but in continuity. Humanity is the only species that builds monuments to memory. We create in stone what the earth itself cannot erase. The first engineers knew that water could destroy cities, but not geometry. Floods can wash away clay, but not proportion. Fire can consume wood, but not alignment. They built for eternity because they had seen what impermanence could do. When we look at the megaliths scattered across continents, we are seeing the echo of a single idea, that understanding the universe is the highest act of creation. The builders were not worshipping gods in stone, they were inscribing mathematics in nature. The same ratios found in their temples, 1 to 1.618, the golden mean, appear in the spiral of shells, the pattern of galaxies, the rhythm of heartbeats. They were encoding the structure of reality itself. In their geometry, they sought not faith, but harmony. The tragedy is that we remember their monuments, but not their meaning. Modern civilization, with all its machines and mathematics, has forgotten what they knew intuitively, that knowledge and wisdom are not the same. Knowledge measures, wisdom aligns. We have rediscovered their numbers but lost their purpose, yet their stones still whisper. If we listen, we can hear the hum of order they left behind. Perhaps the first engineers of Earth did not vanish. Perhaps their legacy flows through us in every act of creation that seeks permanence. The builders of cathedrals, the architects of observatories, the scientists mapping the stars, all are inheritors of the same impulse. We build not merely to shelter, but to remember. Every city skyline, every spacecraft, every equation written to describe the cosmos is a continuation of that first human act of alignment, the raising of stone toward the sky. The flood erased their world, but it did not erase their intent. Out of the ruins of the Ice Age rose the civilizations we know: Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, Mesoamerica, all bearing echoes of the same design. They were not beginnings, but continuations. The megaliths are not anomalies. They are ancestors. And still, beneath the waves and sands, more wait to be found. The continental shelves of the Atlantic, the Pacific trenches, the drowned valleys of the Indian Ocean, all may hold the remnants of those who built before us. Each discovery brings us closer to a realization both humbling and sublime, that humanity is older, wiser, and more enduring than we dare to believe. We are the memory of the flood. We are the descendants of those who measured the world to survive it. The stones they left are not relics. They are instructions, reminders that civilization can perish, but consciousness endures. They tell us that to build is to remember, and to remember is to defy time. The final truth is simple, though vast. The first engineers of Earth were not myth. They were the manifestation of a truth that defines our species. To measure, to align, to create harmony between the seen and the unseen. This is what it means to be human. They were the first to stand between heaven and earth and say, "This is our place." And when their world drowned, they carved that knowledge into stone so that we, millennia later, might find it again. Every pillar, every terrace, every star-aligned chamber is their voice, speaking through the silence of ages. The language of that voice is not words, but wonder. The builders are gone, their names erased by the tides of 12,000 years. But their craft endures, their memory endures, and through us, their purpose endures. Long before the flood came, they measured the stars and carved their dreams in stone. We are the inheritors of that dream, the next generation of engineers in an unbroken line, stretching back to the dawn of time. Beneath the waves and beneath the earth lie the first stones ever placed by human hands. Their builders are gone, their cities washed away, but their craft remains. They were the first to understand that the universe could be written in measure, and that through measure, memory becomes eternal. We build today with metal and glass, with engines and circuits, but the principle is unchanged. To create is to resist entropy. To align with the cosmos is to honor those who came before. The flood will come again someday, in water or in fire or in the silence of time, but the act of creation will rise once more. It always does. That is the promise written in every megalith. The promise of endurance, of renewal, of remembering. And so, the story closes where it began, not in loss, but in continuity. The forgotten world before history is not gone. It lives in every line we draw, every equation we balance, every temple and tower that reaches for the sky. The first engineers of Earth taught us the oldest truth of all, that memory is the foundation of civilization, and that through memory, even the drowned can rise again.